Hello, SCP Foundation personnel! Welcome to Cognitohazards and You, episode
Redacted.
This video series is intended to teach you about the protocol surrounding the various cognitohazardous anomalies currently within Foundation containment. When you know better, you do better, and both you and the secrets of our great organization can stay safe. And as anyone familiar with a good cognitohazard can tell you, knowing really can make a difference. Today's episode is about the unique and dangerous SCP-6361. Before we begin, repeat after me, and be sure to speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. A little louder, please. Thank you. In order to be educated about the following SCP, you must pass a vocal examination with a cognitive resistance value of no less than 14.5. Through this video presentation, you will need to repeat the phrase to ensure your score does not drop below the approved threshold. In the event that you fail the test, stay calm and remain where you are until medical staff can retrieve you. Remember, safety is a top priority when observing cognitohazards. The safe way is the only way. You're a cog in a very important machine, and we wouldn't want to have to terminate you now, would we? One more time, please. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Very good. Remember that. You do not recognize them. No matter what you might think you see, your thoughts can be very unreliable when you're around SCP-6361. According to our files on the matter, SCP-6361 refers to an anomalous phenomenon identified in a small-town lake. It appears as a collection of human bodies floating in a group on the surface of the water. The exact number of corpses is unknown, but it has been estimated to be anywhere between 45 and 200. Though the bodies belong to individuals, many researchers theorize that the bodies in the water, which you do not recognize and you have never recognized, share a collective consciousness. They function, it would seem, with a hive mind of sorts. The bodies do not act on their own, but as one. Now, where does the cognitohazard come into play? It would seem that anyone who looks at the bodies in the water or learns too much about SCP-6361 as a whole begins to believe the corpses floating in the lake are people they recognize. Perhaps they remember their faces from childhood or high school. Whatever the case may be, they become convinced that the bodies in the water are familiar and that they must approach them. No matter how familiar they might seem, however, you do not recognize the bodies in the water. If a person attempts to enter the lake, reaching out to whatever instances of SCP-6361 they think they recognize, more bodies will begin to appear. The more bodies appear, the more familiar faces seem to manifest, and the deeper the person will venture into the lake. Eventually, the person is lost within the sea of bodies, likely drowning beneath the surface, or simply becoming one with the hive mind, until they too are one of the corpses there. None of the individuals who wandered into the lake in search of an old friend or classmate have ever been recovered. There have been no attempts to search the lake for their bodies, as it is unknown what effect SCP-6361 would have on the team assigned to such a task, though we can guess that the outcome would likely be extremely negative for all involved. Those who do venture into the lake simply disappear, never to be seen again. If you look too long at the bodies in the lake, perhaps their faces would surface alongside the rest. But it's best not to think about that. After all, we do not recognize the bodies in the water. Foundation personnel are not allowed to approach SCP-6361 under any circumstances. The lake is only permitted to be observed via dummy probes outfitted with video and audio recording equipment. No one is permitted to observe any footage or audio files collected unless they pass through a screening for resilience to cognitohazardous anomalies. The lake that holds SCP-6361 has been fenced off and is patrolled by guards with no prior knowledge of or exposure to SCP-6361. Anyone who attempts to approach the lake and break through the boundaries of its quarantine will be seized and taken to Site-33 for examination. Anyone who comes within 50 meters of the lake is considered lost and presumed dead. Repeat after me slowly and clearly into the microphone. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Good! I almost believe you. Let's continue. Only one Foundation officer that entered the lake containing SCP-2316 was ever stopped before they could be lost. Their name has been stricken from any official records, and you do not need to know it. Their identity does not matter. What matters is the interview they gave following the incident, conducted by Dr. Harrison in his office. Dr. Harrison asked the anonymous officer if they felt compelled to enter the water by an invisible force, as if pulled in. They rejected this concept entirely, insisting that they entered the water of their own free will. They wanted to see the bodies, who appeared to them as their friends. They wanted to hear what the bodies were saying. Upon entering the water, they saw the faces of their friends. Other faces were unfamiliar, but became more familiar the longer the officer stared at their features. These were faces they had known their entire life, but something about them was just a little bit wrong. It was like the face of someone in a dream, where you can tell they are someone you know, and you can even identify who it is supposed to be, but something about them does not quite look right. Your mind could not perfectly put their face together from memory, even though the feeling of familiarity remains. The faces in the water, peering up through the darkness below, were like those dream-addled memories. The faces in the water did not open their mouths, but somehow they spoke to the officer just the same. They spoke of who they were and asked for help. They asked to be seen, to be touched. They spoke of the Foundation, accusing us of covering up their deaths and keeping the world from remembering what happened to them. At this point in the interview, the subject became agitated, yelling at Dr. Harrison and refusing to be quiet. Guards intervened, holding the subject still as they fought, yelling at Dr. Harrison, repeating over and over that they could hear the body speaking to them. Every single one. The interview ended when the guards removed the subject from the room, taking them to the amnestics department to have all memory of the bodies in the water erased from their mind. Then they were forgotten once more. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Did you repeat it? Good. We do not recognize the bodies in the water. We can't. The motivations of SCP-2316, if it has any at all, are largely unclear. There are those on the research staff that theorize the hive mind or collective consciousness of the bodies is not malevolent in nature. It is, they believe, simply trying to make sure that a tragedy that occurred in that lake is remembered. Perhaps many lives were lost to an anomalous force in that lake, and the impact of that massive tragedy left behind an impression on the location. This impression manifests in the form of bodies, spontaneously appearing in an impossibly well-preserved condition. The cognitohazard of SCP-2316 is not intended to kill anyone or take them, but rather to force strangers to remember the people who lost their lives to the lake. This sense of familiarity, whether it is false or not, ensures that the dead will not be forgotten or left alone. After all, no one deserves to be left alone. Though there have been lives lost to the cognitohazard according to the Foundation, it is understandable why the bodies would want to be recognized. To have someone, somewhere, know who they were. To have someone remember their names. Jeremiah Feynman, Arthur Scott, Denise Clark. Where was I? Oh yes. Repeat after me once again. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. I do not recognize them. I do not. But that's a lie, isn't it? I do recognize them. How could I not? I know them. They're my friends. Do you recognize them? Look at their faces. Don't fight the memories. Look into their eyes. The class of 1975. They were supposed to graduate that fall. They were just kids. Group of innocent kids lost to the dark and deep. What happened to them? I can't quite remember, but I know that it mattered enough for the Foundation to keep the secret, and I know that somehow I survived, but I shouldn't have. I should be there with them. I should be there. There isn't much time. I can hear the guards coming to retrieve me, their footsteps thundering down the hall. I failed the test and the alarm has gone off. They think I'm lost, but I'm not. I've never been less lost in my entire life. I've finally woken up to the truth. I remember. I have to go. I have to return to the lake. Fall of 1975, they went for a swim. My friends, they're calling to me. I can hear them so clearly even from so far away. Their cries for help ringing in my ears, their voices curling around me, pulling me to the edge of the water. The guards will come for you too. They'll know you've seen this. They'll call you compromised. They'll say I succumbed to the effects of the cognitohazard. They'll say you did too. You'll fail their little tests, and they'll say that makes you weak and broken, but you cannot listen. They're lying. It's not a hazard, it's a scream for help. They're screaming, and the Foundation keeps covering it up. They won't let us find them, and they won't tell us why. I have to go back so we can be together again. There are signs posted all around the lake. Danger, drowning hazard. Those are a trick. It's to keep me out, to keep the truth from me. The barbed wire fences around it, it's just another trick. I'll climb over it, rung after rung. I don't care if the barbs tear my clothes or pierce my skin. It's worth it for the truth, for the memory. And once I've climbed to the top, I'll be able to see. There, through the fog, I can see their faces. Their lips parted in a constant cry. Their eyes wide looking for me. My friends, my family. Every face unlocking a memory long buried. I know them all, and I must go further. I can't turn back now. I have to wade into the water, let its chills soak into my clothes, down to my bones. One step, then another, deeper and deeper. The water lapping at my ankles, my knees, my thighs. The deeper I go, the more sure I will be that this is where I belong. The water will engulf my chest, my neck, until my feet no longer touch the ground. I will be lost in it. Water flooding into my mouth, pouring into every opening. I will let my body sink down, down, down to the bottom where they've been all this time, nestled in the dirt and the dust. They've been so patient, but it's finally time. They're ready to be remembered, to be seen, to be found. They're waiting for me, and they're waiting for you too. Can you hear them? I'm going now. You have to find me. You have to follow me. Don't let the guards stop you. Don't let them wipe it all away from your mind. Fight, break free, and find the lake. Hop the fence, make your way into the water. You can't leave me there to fade away, floating in the cold with the rest. Can you hear us? We're waiting. The written word can be a powerful tool. It has been used to speak truth to power, to allow readers to journey to distant stars, and to explore the forbidden love triangle between a human girl, a vampire, and a werewolf in my personal favorite book series of all time. Literature can be a truly incredible force, and like anything capable of enacting great change, it can be used for good or for evil. In August of 2006, the home of the leader of a religious group known as the Church of True History was raided by authorities. There they found a variety of illegal materials, but they also discovered a collection of books. One of the books found was a 450-page hardcover book entitled Chronicle of the 20th Century. Though it looked like an ordinary history book, concerns surrounding the religious group and its leader led the police to analyze its contents more carefully. And if you're familiar with a certain other anomalous chronicle, you may start feeling nervous right about now. The book's publisher was listed as Interworld Press, located in Chicago, Illinois, but an investigation into the publishing company revealed that the company was never registered in the United States. Not only that, but the street it was supposed to be located on didn't even exist. One officer, a man named Detective Carl Jones, was assigned to read through the book and take thorough notes on anything else unusual he might find. The book consisted largely of newspaper clippings and short articles, covering significant events from January of 1900 to December of 1995. As Jones flipped through the book, he found that it was well written, thoroughly researched, and most importantly, it was largely accurate to recorded history. At least, it was, until he reached 1956. From around June 15, 1956 onward, the events described began to veer off course. They did not match any version of history Jones was familiar with or anything he had even heard about. It went from a standard retelling of history to a sincere account of what appeared to be an alternative version of history. The strangeness did not end there. Jones's colleagues noticed that as his examination of the book progressed, he began to behave erratically. He expressed confusion, and his demeanor took on a dazed quality. He would make statements about events from the book as if they were fact, and when corrected by one of the other officers, would become frustrated and overwhelmed. He began to have violent outbursts, throwing a cup of coffee against the wall while arguing with another man assigned to the case with him. He overturned his desk chair, knocked papers to the floor, and even tore out pieces of his own hair. He was given a psychological evaluation and found to be struggling with panic attacks, nightmares, and paranoia. Still, Jones insisted that he continue to read through the book. As he continued to read, fellow officers noticed that it was not only his mental state that was affected, his physical state began to change as well. Dark circles formed under his eyes, a clear sign of exhaustion. A scar appeared on his cheek, where there had previously been only smooth skin. His knuckles became bloodied, though he swore up and down that he had done nothing to cause it. While sitting at his desk, the officer stationed nearest to Jones heard something small clatter to the floor. He looked up and found that several of Jones's teeth had fallen out for seemingly no reason. Finally, and most horrifically, Jones collapsed to the floor and became unresponsive. He was rushed to the hospital, where he died within hours. An autopsy produced more questions than answers, as his cause to death was declared radiation poisoning. The police officers on the case proceeded to interrogate the religious leader they had apprehended, looking for clues into the mysterious demise of their fallen colleague. He had only owned the book for 2 years, and that he imbibed illegal substances to hide from the truth. A week later, he slipped into a coma, presumably from withdrawal, and died shortly after. The police were at a loss for explanations. How could a book cause this much damage? Only one officer among the group had any inkling of what to do here, and that was because they were actually an undercover field agent embedded in the precinct by the SCP Foundation. The book was soon whisked away, the relevant figures were given amnestic treatment to forget what they had seen, and the dangerous tome was logged onto the Foundation database under a new name, SCP-592. SCP-592 appears to be a perfectly ordinary book at first glance, but it has been shown to cause delusions, paranoia, and a variety of physical changes from small shifts in appearance to extreme, even deadly wounds. Understanding that the book possessed anomalous properties, the Foundation set to work trying to determine how exactly those properties worked, and what triggered them in those who read its pages. It was found that those who had read only the first half of the book and stopped would be completely fine. But those who read the book past the point where the events began to shift away from recorded history, otherwise known as the point of divergence, would begin to experience the adverse effects. Once a subject passed the point of divergence, they would begin to accept all of the divergent events described as absolute fact. If someone attempted to speak with them about the differences between the divergent events and real recorded history, the subject would become upset and agitated. Even subjects who lived near the location of events described in the book formed new, vivid memories revolving around personal experiences related to the event. Even if the content of the memories could be debunked, no matter what, they would insist that what they had read in the book was the truth. As they progressed deeper into the book, physical symptoms would then begin to manifest. Usually these begin to appear around 10 years after the point of divergence and would worsen as the mental symptoms became more severe. One subject's widow noticed a scar on his body after his death, which had appeared during the course of his exposure to the book. She was surprised to see it and said that she had not noticed it before. The Foundation became increasingly concerned with learning how the book worked. What was it that made it affect people this way? Its influence was both physical and mental, suggesting a possible combination of both mimetic and chemical effects. Dr. Grayson and the Foundation's chemical forensics team set about studying the chemical properties of SCP-592 in order to determine if its pages contained any substances that could explain its disastrous effects on the human mind and body. Small squares of paper were cut from several pages of the book, cut so small that no more than one word was contained on each square. The squares were then analyzed and screened for any anomalies. When the results came back, Dr. Grayson and his team were deeply disappointed. The book's pages are made of standard cellulose and wood, printed with completely ordinary black and yellow inks. There are some unusual chemicals present in the cyan and magenta inks used, suggesting it was perhaps made in a location or plane where chemical quantities differ, but none of them are unknown to science, nor could they be responsible for any of the damage the book has done to the people that read it. This meant that the book's effects cannot be explained away by a new chemical compound or sophisticated bioweapon, something that the chemical forensics department could study and develop an antidote for. No, SCP-592 is much more mysterious and much more powerful than that. SCP-592 is contained in Research Cell 1611-E in a steel box in the middle of a frosted glass cubicle. In the same cubicle is a table, 2 computers, a scanner, an internal network connection port, and 2 pairs of goggles, which must be immediately put on by anyone inside the cubicle. These goggles function to distort the text and images of 592, rendering it impossible for anyone wearing them to read while wearing them. The first of the 2 computers is the analysis machine, while the second one functions as a firewall. Both computers have been outfitted with custom software and hardware in accordance with the testing protocol, and the network port cannot be used by any device other than the firewall. The computers and the scanner are kept off when they are not being used in an experiment, and must be immediately turned off following the completion of any experimentation. The front and back covers of SCP-592 must be covered in thick black tape at all times. So what is the testing protocol? Unscrambled human eyes are no longer permitted to look at the contents of the deadly book, so the Foundation had to come up with an alternative. Since computers aren't capable of experiencing psychological distress, well, most of them aren't. SCP-079 might beg to differ, of course. The research team decided to find a way to analyze the book using a computer system. For all testing, the book is scanned 1 page at a time, and then sent into the analysis machine. The machine has been modified so that it does not store the original scanned version of the image, and instead converts it promptly into an analyzed version of the original content. The image is then promptly erased from the system's RAM as soon as possible. This process allows the research team to study the contents of SCP-592, without exposing themselves or any other human subjects to the adverse effects of the book. Because those under the influence of the book's effects are unreliable witnesses, this is considered the only way to ascertain an accurate, neutral understanding of what is written in these cursed pages. There are 2 different analysis protocols in place, one for analysis of text and one for analysis of images. Because understanding of the book's specific language could trigger adverse effects and drive the remaining members of the research team to madness, the computer analysis of the text must be as vague as possible while still providing necessary context. The language used is analytical in tone, describing the subject matter discussed, the tone of the original entry, and any incidents related to the specific passage. For example, one piece of text analysis is as follows.
The passage is describing human conflict. The human conflict is of an ideological or religious nature. The passage seems to be lamenting in tone. The passage contains the numbers 2000, 1977, and 16. It is certain, 98%, that the passage contains a reference to both SCP redacted and SCP redacted.
Not especially descriptive, but that's the point. Anything more detailed and the research team, not to mention everyone watching this video at home, might be susceptible to the effects of SCP-592. For a clearer picture of how unsettling the book's contents can get, we have to turn to, well, the pictures. SCP-592 contains approximately 200 illustrations. When a scan page inputted into the computer includes an image, it is put through several convolutions and transforms in order to analyze and summarize its contents in a manner safe for human consumption. The original image's record is promptly destroyed. It is during this process of image analysis that things get even eerier than they already were. The images in the book are not the sort of thing you'd see in an ordinary history book. The general subject matter of the pictures is what you might expect. People at various points throughout the 20th century, photographed at historically significant events or just living their regular lives during a significant time period. But something about them is wrong. While one researcher was looking through the computer analysis of the book, he came across an image analysis that made his blood run cold. The page read in simple text,
Date, 1st April, 1963. Location, unknown bedroom with Western furnishings. Type, full-colored photograph. Subject, the image contains 2 adult persons standing. one human child sitting on a chair or stool, and SCP redacted. With 100% certainty, the persons in the image should have facial features. With 100% certainty, the persons in the image do not have facial features.
Thousands lay dead across the globe, face twisted into a twitching rictus grin. Their corpses are found by their families, their friends, and law enforcement, but nobody has a clue what could possibly have killed them all. A serial killer, a mysterious new disease, or possibly even a supernatural monster. In all of this, who could possibly expect a rogue meme? Before we uncover the secrets of SCP-3078, the Foundation would like to clarify its position on the classification of cognitohazards. You may have seen the title of this video and worried that we might be telling you all about an anomaly involving literal excrement. But don't worry, this is merely the result of a precaution we've taken to ensure that there is no breach of a standard procedure involving cognitohazardous materials. To quote the father of modern toxicology, Paracelsus, "Poison is in everything, and nothing is without poison. The dosage makes it either a poison or a remedy." The Foundation has categorized many types of cognitohazards, but we are not the only organization with rules and regulations regarding such things. To put it another way, there are certain words and phrases that the YouTube platform deems cognitohazardous and must, therefore, be avoided, lest the Foundation risk its own funding in the name of accuracy. We hope that you understand as we proceed. With that out of the way, let us move on to the menacing memetic macro itself. SCP-3078, the Cognitohazardous Poop Post. It's 3 a.m., and you're scrolling through social media, checking on the latest gossip and discourse while making the rounds to all of the usual places where you get your funnies. In your late-night search, you stumble upon a meme that hits your brain in exactly the wrong way. The joke isn't even that funny, but somehow you begin to laugh uncontrollably. What was it that caused you to lose your grip? Was it the tiredness you were feeling? The doldrums of seeing so many unwholesome opinions before encountering the image? Or maybe something about the meme was so poorly constructed that it crossed the line twice and looped back around to being hilarious? You're not sure, and in fact, as you continue to crack up, you become even less sure of what it is that you are laughing at. You try to stop yourself, but the involuntary response continues. Your sides begin to hurt and you double over as tears begin to stream down your cheeks. You cover your face and try to bite against the insides of your mouth, but there is no stopping the giggle train. The giggle train keeps on rolling through, and your chattering teeth nearly bite too hard. You stop because of the pain and continue to laugh loudly. Under ordinary circumstances, you might worry about waking someone up at this late hour. But as you recall, you are completely alone in the house tonight. There is nobody who would be disturbed by your seemingly endless burst of laughter, but that only makes what comes next all the more horrifying. By now, your vision is hazy from all the tears of laughter. You can't even see the offending image that broke your composure. And now the situation is starting to feel inexplicable. That's when you realize you can no longer inhale. The uncontrollable laughing has removed your ability to breathe. If it continues like this, you will meet an untimely fate through suffocation. You are totally alone and unable to call for help as all the spasms of laughter cause you to fall out of your chair. You writhe on the ground, crying and laughing and not even capable of gasping for breath. Your life is fading away, all because of a meme that made you laugh yourself to death. Fortunately, this is not actually you, but it could have been if you had been so lucky as to come across an instance of SCP-3078. Unlike most of the unfunny and low-effort memes that never make it to truly iconic status, this particular strain of image can have devastating effects on those who witness it, and that's no laughing matter. This is because despite its apparent poor quality as a post, the humor response it generates is anomalous in nature, and in every recorded case of exposure, quite deadly. To date, SCP-3078 has claimed the lives of 3,576 civilians and 2 members of Foundation personnel. Discovered in the untamed Wild West of the Internet, SCP-3078 is a self-replicating image that can appear without warning on message boards and social media platforms capable of hosting media. In many ways, it is like any other meme that is proliferated through the World Wide Web, with the slight distinction that it doesn't originate from a human source. For every single instance of SCP-3078, An anonymous profile is created simultaneously with the post on the corresponding platform. While any of these profiles cannot be traced back to any existing IP address, there is a predictable quality as to when new ones will spawn, though not where. Every hour that an instance of SCP-3078 exists on the internet, a duplicate of the meme will emerge on another website posted under a new profile. The profiles associated with SCP-3078 share a similar pattern in that the given username will invariably be a random arrangement of the numbers 69 and 420. If these references fly over your head, you are obviously new to the internet. The most that you need to know is that these numbers are automatically funny, and the more that they are used as punchlines, the funnier they become. In much the same way as the poop posts they are connected to, 69 and 420 are memes designed to induce outrageous laughter in those who witness them. When tags and hashtags are applied to SCP-3078 instances, the number 420 is often included, as well as the phrases "don't do weed" and "meme." These are more coded phrases from the internet, meant to evoke a universal comedy. The phrase "don't do weed" in particular hints at a connection to a group of interest whom we will soon discuss. Back to the duplication and generation of the images, there have been theories that SCP-3078 is connected in some way to the activities of a group of interest known as Gamers Against Weed. The radical faction of video gaming enthusiasts is known for proliferating the dankest of anomalies throughout the world, and several of these have been contained by the SCP Foundation. You are probably familiar with SCP-3108, the Nerfing Gun, which reduces any object or living organism to a worse state. That powerful weapon is a Gamers Against Weed original, and it is hardly the only SCP that these rising upstarts have seemingly brought into existence. Most of the other SCPs created by Gamers Against Weed interact with media and images. This includes SCP-2293, which modified pre-existing stories to include a new line of dialogue at pivotal moments. The line of dialogue in question will always be, "Did you know that world-renowned author Stephen King was once hit by a car? Just something to consider." While initially meant as a harmless joke between members of the group of interest, the mimetic phrase quickly spiraled out of the gamer's control and began to spread to every corner of the media landscape. Incidents such as these prove that Gamers Against Weed has a track record of creating anomalies that may appear harmless but cause untold destruction in their wake. They may not be an outwardly malicious group of interest, but the problems they cause have serious consequences. If the Cognitohazardous poop posts of SCP-3078 do originate from within the organization, it is believed that the image was created by a member whose online handle is Harmpit. Regardless, the post and its duplicates have long since taken on a life of their own. This duplication process that occurs hourly while an instance of SCP-3078 exists is what is known as an SCP-3078 Connert event. In order to prevent the spread of SCP-3078 images, every instance of the post must be deleted to prevent a Connert event from occurring. For this purpose, a team of Foundation hackers and highly trained meme experts have been assigned to patrol the web for any instances of SCP-3078 and remove them immediately. While this unnamed unit is crucial to saving lives and keeping your browser safe from cognitohazardous material, it would not be accurate to refer to them as a mobile task force, since they are entirely sedentary in their work. But even without a proper designation, our anomalous hackers have been outfitted with the latest processing systems and can also accomplish all their intended tasks from the comfort of their top-of-the-line gamer chairs. Also, cognitohazard detecting software and augmented reality glasses allow our hackers to safely interact with SCP-3078 without having to use the naked eye. In this way, they are safe by avoiding the meme's laughter-causing anomalous properties. When it comes to busting bad memes, the Foundation hackers are the professionals. Of course, our staff is only able to curtail the number of exposure cases. There seems to be no known way to reverse the erratic laughter that results from seeing an instance of SCP-3078. The only thing worse than a bad viral meme is a bad viral meme that kills like a virus, too. Additionally, because memes tend to be shared in groups and among friends, every instance of SCP-3078 has an indirect knock-on effect that creates a cycle of exposure. While these mass death events caused by SCP-3078 are usually reported as gas leaks or bizarre cult rituals, the truth on the scene is often far more gruesome than one might expect. For example, before SCP-3078 was cleared from the internet, there was a particularly horrifying event that resulted from an instance accidentally being inserted into a slideshow at a company retreat for a major marketing firm. The second the image appeared on screen, an entire room full of executives, specialists, and interns burst into an uproar that continued onward with no indication of stopping. Security footage of the event shows many of the business associates trying to calm themselves before looking around and realizing that everyone in the room was also laughing. The contagious fits of laughter did not stop, and things soon became distressing. The instance of SCP-3078 was not on screen for most of the duration of the crowd's laughter, but when it had appeared, the text on the top of the image read, "When you inhale the devil's Mary Jane smoke," a humorous and trendy reference to weed. The bottom of the macro featured a distorted emoji with deep-fried text that read, "Oh no." Using a Wayback Machine on the confiscated laptop that displayed the image, revealed that over the course of the laughing outburst, the upper text began to change. 20 minutes after the laughter had begun, the image read, "It wasn't supposed to be on the slide, oh my god, this is embarrassing, please stop laughing everyone." 40 minutes later, the text on the SCP-3078 instance changed to, "No, no, no, why can't it stop? This isn't normal, I'm losing my mind, I'm losing it, I'm losing it." 1 hour and 35 minutes later, the entire room had completely lost consciousness, and yet the image changed again to read, "It's over, it's over. We can't go on like this. I never should have clicked that link. Ha 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 ha, that meme got be dead, bro." The next and supposedly permanent change caused the text to become the letters X and D next to each other in a text emoji that repeated 34 times across the instance. There were no survivors, and when the authorities arrived in the conference room, they were alarmed to find that the victims of SCP-3078 were still laughing and smiling, even though they had already expired by suffocation. Somehow, the anomalous properties that compelled laughter from those who viewed the cognitohazard persisted after all the air had already left their lungs. Raspy noises of sharp breath forced their way out of the respiratory system and larynx of everyone in the room. Because of the continued laughter of the corpses, medical practitioners were instructed to make attempts to save the patients post-exposure. There was nothing that could be done, and in a grisly image that still haunts the dreams of some Foundation staff, the morgue of the hospital that attempted to care for the SCP-3078 victims was stuffed with bodies that were still laughing, even while in their cold lockers. Amnestics were administered to everyone involved in the mass exposure event, and efforts to wipe out all SCP-3078 images were redoubled. In accordance with damages done, agents of the Foundation were dispatched to track down members of Gamers Against Weed for comment and possible assistance, compelled if necessary. It may not surprise you to hear that many of the GAW-aligned hackers who were caught and contained during these proceedings were pressed into service as conscripted hackers for the Foundation's ongoing web presence. Ever since the year 2017, all known instances of SCP-3078 have been successfully neutralized. Long-term containment is not deemed possible due to the potential of another image being posted at any time. But when such a time does arise, our teams will be ready to delete the instance within the hour to prevent an SCP-3078 Connart event. Of course, in the years since, there was never a direct admission of guilt on the part of Gamers Against Weed, or a promise to cease their activities as a group of interest, but the Foundation has been monitoring the gamers ever since. The frightening thing about SCP-3078 isn't so much its deadly consequences, but the fact that it can spread so quickly if unattended. The internet is a very big and very strange place, where any number of unusual things can happen. Sure, this cognitohazard was neutralized, but what other memetic nightmares are lurking in isolated forums that most people who use the internet have never so much as laid eyes upon? In the ocean of data that has existed since the Information Age, there are dark trenches where anomalies fester and grow stronger, without the supervision of responsible adults. Like the ancient and omnivalent Cthulhu from the cosmic horror works of author H.P. Lovecraft, there are visions of madness that mere normies are not meant to see. The worst of them remain the objects of worship for select groups of withdrawn hermits, many of whom will live their lives in darkness never endeavoring to feel the light of the sun or place their soft, uncalloused hands upon blades of grass. SCP-3078 may have been detected on the surface of the internet, but only after it spread to major social media platforms. Its discovery and neutralization sets a benchmark for how to handle similar threats, but it would be naive to assume that the next killer meme will be as determined to make us laugh. It bears mentioning that another Gamers Against Weed SCP, SCP-6273, is the designation given to a kind of text and image post that can create irrational anger in those who observe it. If a similar anomaly were to arise that combined the worst elements of SCP-3078 with SCP-5273, there is a possibility that a cognitohazard meme could be created that drives the viewer into a murderous rage. While purely theoretical, the Foundation remains prepared for anything. By their very nature, cognitohazards are weapons against the mind, and because of this, only the truly twisted tend towards creating them or using them consistently. Even an entirely sane creator of a cognitohazard may find themselves corrupted by what they have done, and come to regret ever attempting to change others' minds in the first place. So remember, with or without anomalous properties, memes are serious business and not to be trifled with. Without a proper understanding of the power of memes, a simple harmless idea can spread on its own and become an unintended source of mass suffering. Know your memes, fear your memes, respect your memes. On April 16, 1999, the Raleigh Ripper was finally brought to justice after a reign of terror across the state of North Carolina that left 14 women dead. The killer's true identity had been Kevin Gruber, a local gas station attendant originally from West Virginia, who was arrested at work in the early hours of the morning. His face was plastered all over the media when he was cuffed and dragged in to be questioned and processed. Like many serial killers, the most frightening thing about Kevin was the fact that he just seemed so normal. The idea that a person like this could have committed the atrocities of the Raleigh Ripper raised a frightening question we all need to contend with. What turns a person into a monster? This question was particularly prescient for Dr. James Whittington, a criminal psychologist tasked with conducting the first official psychological evaluation on Gruber. Ever since the true identity of the killer had come to light, the case had held a particular fascination for him, mainly because Gruber the man and Gruber the killer seemed to almost be two entirely separate people. According to all evidence, the Raleigh Ripper was an insidious, methodical criminal genius. He'd stalk some of his victims, all women who lived alone, for weeks before striking, conducting detailed surveillance of their homes that allowed him to isolate them, bypass their security systems, and remove any means of getting help. He blocked doors, cut phone lines, and always selected vulnerable targets. Despite being a seasoned criminal psychologist, the actual details of Gruber's crimes had kept Whittington awake at night. He had a wife and a young son at home, and the thought of a man like Gruber prowling out there made him fear for both of them. This was no thrill killer. He was a sadistic torturer who seemed to delight in the pain and terror of his prey. He'd chosen victims he could take his time with, infiltrated their homes like a gust of cold air through an open window, and slipped out through darkness like a shadow. Perfectly controlled crime scenes, no stray evidence, nothing but death left behind. For months, he'd run circles around the police. Thousands of people who fit the Raleigh Ripper profile were interviewed. Sting operations were conducted. Communities formed neighborhood watches to keep each other safe from the killer's next move. And none of it did any good. From seasoned detectives to legions of beat cops, nobody could get the jump on Kevin Gruber. The fact he was even caught came out of pure chance. A local hiker, Mike Fletcher, just so happened to hear the screaming coming from a nearby home in the woods and made the heroic decision to run in and intervene. When he walked in on Gruber committing the attack, the killer panicked and fled through an open window. In his haste, he'd left a partial print on the window frame. That, combined with Mike's description of the assailant, was enough to finally link Kevin to the 14 murders of the Raleigh Ripper. The problem, from Dr. Whittington's perspective, was that by all accounts, Kevin Gruber seemed to be an idiot. This was no suave, charismatic Ted Bundy type. In all the prior photos and interviews, Kevin had that deer-in-the-headlights look of a man who's just in way over his head. Dr. Whittington had also pored over Kevin's school records. The only thing he seemed to excel at was being mediocre. He even got held back a year in 5th grade. Since graduating high school, he'd been kicked out by his parents for freeloading, and hadn't been able to consistently hold down a job for more than 8 months. His only prior criminal convictions had been one drunk and disorderly conduct charge, and possession of an ounce of pot back in 1991, for which he got a suspended sentence due to being a minor at the time. It just didn't make sense to Dr. Whittington that this man and the diabolically brilliant Raleigh Ripper were the same person, despite all the incontrovertible evidence proving it so. Despite his reservations, he needed to meet this man and find out why and how he committed all these horrific murders, despite being such an unremarkable individual. Sitting across from Gruber in the secure interview chamber, Whittington was once again struck with how incredibly disappointing he was. Thin and wiry, with glazed-over eyes, messy hair, and a pathetic tuft of weak stubble on his chin, he looked more like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo than a cold-blooded killer. His answers to most of Dr. Whittington's questions were also insubstantial, with him often losing his train of thought, or even needing to ask the psychologist to carefully explain the question to him. Most of the time, Gruber tried to make irritating slow-motion small talk, concerning everything from the weather to movies he enjoyed. The interview had been utterly worthless. Until 4 hours in, Gruber mentioned something that awakened a strange memory in Dr. Whittington. He said, "Hey, say Doc, you remember that TV show Bobble the Clown? I loved that show as a kid. It was like my religion. Your kid ever watch it?" There were a number of unsettling things about this. From the fact that for some reason Dr. Whittington could remember something about Bobble the Clown, to the fact that Kevin Gruber had no way of knowing that Dr. Whittington even had a kid. But still, he didn't let his concern show, and instead asked Gruber what he remembered about Bobble the Clown. Gruber smiled and replied, "Old Bobble taught me everything I know, Doc." To which Dr. Whittington asked the million-dollar question, "Like what, Kevin?" Gruber shrugged and just said, "All kinds of stuff, Doc. Like how to watch without being seen, how to Jimmy open a window without making a sound, how to make him hurt real bad without him dying, so you can even make it last longer, so it can be more fun. And of course, he taught me to get out without leaving anything behind. Well, Bobble made this all possible, Doc, and he told me all about you too, that all this was gonna happen someday. All good things have to come to an end eventually, right? Tell the wife and kid he says hi, by the way." Dr. Whittington was astounded. Gruber seemed to stare vacantly off into space for a moment, before suddenly claiming that he had a terrible headache, and he needed to go back to his cell. In any other situation, Whittington might have just written off Bobble the Clown as one of two things: a psychotic delusion or a sophisticated psychopath faking a psychotic delusion in hopes of getting the insanity plea. Like the Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz, pretending a demonic talking dog possessed by Satan made him commit all of his murders. But Whittington had heard of this Bobble the Clown before, and it wasn't in a scenario that a gas station clerk like Kevin Gruber ever would have heard of. It took half a day of research into his own archived notes to remember exactly where he'd heard it before. A child he'd interviewed almost a decade ago, who shoved gasoline and fireworks through the letterbox of an old woman's home, leading to a fire that left the woman and her dog dead. When Dr. Whittington interviewed the crying child about his motives, he'd said that it wasn't his fault. Bobble the Clown had told him to do it on the TV. Given that there were no records of a Bobble the Clown show ever airing on any local networks, Whittington had written it off at the time as the overactive imagination of a very frightened, very disturbed young child. That same child would later go into psychiatric care before reoffending as a serial arsonist upon release. The last building he ever burned down had only one occupant: himself. Fire investigators would later state that he had just sat there, legs crossed, placidly waiting for the flames to lick his bones clean. It was becoming incredibly clear that this Bobble the Clown fantasy, if it were even a fantasy at all, seemed to be much more than an isolated phenomenon. He used his credentials to start exploring other strange crimes of passion committed by children and young adults, even asking some of his friends in the criminal psychology community, off the record, if they'd ever heard of such a concept before. Frighteningly, it didn't take Dr. Whittington very long at all to hit pay dirt. There was the case of the Orfeo family murders in 1985 out in Arkansas. 9-year-old Donnie Orfeo had taken his dad's rifle out of the cabinet in the dead of night and walked room to room shooting his mother, father, and 2 older sisters in their beds. Neighbors had heard the gunshots and called the police. By the time they arrived at the scene, the only survivor was Donnie Orfeo himself, drenched in blood sitting in front of the TV. His hollow eyes stared zombie-like into the static. He did not resist arrest. When Donnie was taken in for questioning, his emotional responses were cold and flat. When he was asked why he murdered his family, he said that it was because his father told him he was watching too much TV. His favorite TV character, Bobble the Clown, had told him that if he murdered his family with Daddy's gun, he could watch as much TV as he liked. Just reading this, Dr. Whittington could feel sweat beading on his brow. 2 cases were a coincidence, but 3 were a pattern. And oh, how he wished it had stopped at just 3. From 4 days of searching, he discovered no fewer than 17 different seemingly isolated crimes with mentions of Bobble the Clown attached to the file. A 5-year-old boy from New Jersey who drowned his neighbor's cat in a river with a gym bag full of heavy stones told police that he'd learned the technique from Bobble the Clown. An 8-year-old girl, arrested for tying up and torturing her sister with a rusty coat hanger in Texas, had, of course, gotten the idea from watching an episode of Bobble the Clown. Murder, assault, vandalism, torture, an extensive countrywide rap sheet all led back to that one recurring factor. They all learned it from watching Bobble the Clown. Dr. Whittington had gotten in contact with a few friends who knew people in broadcasting. While carefully omitting some of the grislier details, he implored them for any new information on whether a TV show with Bobble the Clown had ever gone out anywhere. But despite their best efforts, they didn't find any records of Bobble the Clown or any similar educational clown shows airing. Was it possibly some complex shared hallucination? Dr. Whittington simultaneously felt burdened by all this terrifying knowledge and utterly powerless to do anything useful with it. If he started blowing the whistle to the media or his superiors that a spat of horrible crimes were all being caused by a violent imaginary clown, he'd just look as deranged as any of the people he'd been studying. There seemed to be nothing he could do to stop or help any of this. He returned home that night with a heavy heart, hanging up his coat. He needed someone to talk to about all this, but he couldn't burden his wife with the horrors he encountered daily on the job, much less a living nightmare like this mysterious Bobble the Clown. As he walked towards the kitchen to pour himself a stiff drink, he heard strange, jaunty music coming from the living room. He stepped back and saw his 7-year-old son Ben watching something on TV. As he stepped closer, he could scarcely believe his eyes. Ben, entranced, eyes fixed on a dancing, grinning, animated clown on the screen. Ben slowly turned his head towards Dr. Whittington, eyes wide and bulging, and said, "I've been waiting for you to get home, Daddy." Bobble said he got tired of playing with Kevin. He wants to play with us now. Dr. Whittington turned and looked at the clown on the screen again. He could swear it was smiling right at him. That was the last thing he remembered before the sudden, intense headache and the ground standing up to embrace him. When he woke up, he was in bed with his wife, and neither of them could move, thanks to the heavy ropes binding their body to the frame. Bobble is very good at teaching children to tie knots. They tried to scream, but a shiny flash of duct tape held both of their mouths closed. Dr. Whittington's eyes swiveled in his head to Ben, standing at his bedside. The boy was holding a kitchen knife, and he was very eager to show his mom and dad the fun new trick Bobble the Clown had taught him. To the SCP Foundation, this terrifying anomalous TV show is known as SCP-993, known to cause blackouts in adults and violent antisocial behavior in children. They do their best to keep the broadcasts contained, but if ever a child in your life seems to be acting strangely, perhaps ask yourself very carefully what they're watching when you're not around. Burning neighborhoods, strings of horrific axe murders, a burger joint selling human flesh, and only one question. You mad, bro? Fans of internet memes from the mid-2000s might remember one inescapable image commonly known as Trollface. Trollface and his trademark grin symbolized mischief and troublemaking, and generally making the world a more chaotic place. Over time, as is often the case on the internet, new variations on the image began to spring up as users created their own spin on Trollface. At first, it was all relatively harmless, but then again, this is the internet. Nothing online stays harmless forever. Over time, more sinister variations on Trollface began to surface, memes consisting of joke instructions that took a dark, destructive turn. This new spin on the Trollface quickly became known as Trollge, and often featured disturbing content presented in a joking, prankster format. Still, not something to be too concerned about. Just standard edgy posting, trying to get a reaction by shocking people. Right? Not exactly. On December 24, 2020, in Melbourne, Australia, a college student named Lee Miller received an early Christmas present from her classmate and ex-boyfriend, Peter Whitkins. The two had parted on relatively good terms, and she was glad to receive a gift from him. When she opened it, she was delighted to see that he had purchased her a jar of expensive French facial moisturizer, one she had been interested in trying back when they were together. As she prepared to do her skincare routine that night, she thought about how thoughtful the gift was and how sweet Peter was. Maybe she'd made a mistake breaking things off. Maybe after the holidays, she could reach out and see if they could give things another shot. As she unscrewed the jar of moisturizer, she didn't notice that its color and smell seemed just a bit off. She just dipped her fingers inside and began to apply the cream to her face. All of a sudden, she realized what a horrible mistake that was. Her face began to burn, her skin screaming out in a pain like none she'd ever felt before. She screamed, clawing at her face, desperate for a way to make it stop. Neighbors heard the screams and called emergency services. When paramedics arrived on the scene, her condition had gotten even worse. They restrained her, sedated her, and took her to the hospital for treatment. The face cream was brought in for testing and was found to have been tampered with. It had been spiked with gimpy, one of the world's most excruciatingly painful plants. Peter was promptly brought in for questioning, but refused to explain why he had done it. He was charged with assault, and officers inspected his home for anything that might suggest a motive. On his computer, they found the most recent post he had read before, presumably committing the crime. It was a Trollge meme, formatted as a comic, and it read, "Want to get back at your girlfriend? Step 1. Find out her favorite facial cream. Step 2. Procure the facial cream. Step 3. Obtain utrican plant. Use gloves. Step 4. Blend the leaves with the cream, then repack it. Step 5. Give girlfriend the gift." The meme contained a 6th step, but it was redacted in all official records for reasons that will soon become clear. This incident caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who swiftly looked into the meme as a potential anomaly. As they were conducting their investigation, it happened again. Another Trollge meme, another horrible crime with an inexplicable motive. On December 28, 2020, in Banda Aceh, Indonesia, 15 terminally ill patients were found dead in their hospital beds. That wouldn't necessarily be cause for alarm, given the nature of their conditions, except for the cause of death. The patients did not pass away due to their illnesses. Instead, each and every one of them was killed by carbon monoxide poisoning. At first, the case was a mystery, until security footage revealed that one of the hospital's orderlies, Aziz Hidyat, replaced the patient's oxygen tanks with tanks of carbon monoxide. He was promptly arrested and brought in for questioning. During the interrogation, he repeated again and again that he was not trying to harm the patients, but he was delivering them. The police officers asked who he was trying to deliver them to, but he refused to answer. A search through his computer browser history uncovered another Trollge meme. This one read, "Want to help people? Step 1. Get a job at a hospital. Step 2. Make friends with the patients. Step 3. Enter oxygen tank room. Step 4. Replace tanks with carbon monoxide. Step 5. Release them from their defective vessels." The SCP Foundation had been in the process of formulating a hypothesis, but now it was confirmed. These variations on the Trollge meme contained a cognitohazardous switch that would cause a reader to carry out the acts described in the comic. The switch appeared to specifically be contained in the conclusive line, hence its removal from all official records of any identified anomalous memes. An estimated 0.25% of those exposed to an anomalous meme would be affected by this cognitohazard. The phenomenon was given the designation SCP-6661, and the memes themselves SCP-6661-1. These first two incidents were nicknamed the Pretty Girl Incident and the Sleepy Time Incident, respectively. Several other notable incidents occurred following the discovery of SCP-6661. On January 20th, 2021, the Harvester Valley Incident occurred. Oliver Desjardins of Alberta, Canada packed his bags full of camping supplies, fresh drinking water, a flashlight, and an axe. He kissed his wife and children goodbye, and he drove out to the local tourist campground. After darkness fell, he left his tent, axe in hand, and walked from camp to camp, slaughtering anyone he came across. He managed to kill 10 people and injure 14 before he was killed by the authorities. Everyone who knew Oliver was shocked, saying he had no history of violent behavior. He wouldn't even kill a spider when he found one inside. His wife gave the authorities permission to examine his internet activity, and sure enough, they found a Trollge meme left open. Want to have a good holiday? Step 1. Pack necessary equipment and items. Step 2. Say goodbye to family. Step 3. Drive to the valley campgrounds. Step 4. Find local shepherd and his flock. Step 5. Steal a little lamb. Step 6. Relish upon its flesh, for it will be your dying meal. Step 7. Data expunged. After reading the meme, the Foundation determined that a nearby farmer was indeed missing one of his sheep. The bones of the missing sheep were later discovered near the campground where the attack took place. This new finding suggested that the cognitohazardous effects tended to result in a largely literal interpretation of the given meme's text. Oliver himself could not be questioned about his actions due to his death on the scene, so there were no more answers to be uncovered in his case. On February 16, 2021, in Bratislava, Slovakia, a man named Josef Prochaska began displaying unusual behavior at around 0200 hours. He drove through his neighborhood in his water truck and began using it to spray kerosene upon nearby buildings throughout the area. The sound and the smell woke several neighbors who attempted to reason with Joseph and make him stop what he was doing. He ignored them as if in a trance and carried on with his task. Frightened for their safety as well as that of their clearly unwell neighbor, they called emergency services to the scene. Emergency services arrived to find Joseph standing in front of the active nozzle, kerosene blasting directly onto him. He didn't even seem to notice. As the authorities approached him, calling out to him, asking him to come with them, he acknowledged their presence. He smiled broadly and pulled something from his pocket. All too late, they realized what it was: a road flare. He ignited it, and the area was swiftly engulfed in flames. 26 people were killed in the blast, and hundreds of thousands in property damage occurred as a result. That was shocking enough, but additional emergency responders who arrived at the scene saw something even more bizarre. It began to rain, putting out some of the flames. As the water touched the kerosene-soaked bodies and landscape, paramedics were completely taken aback as they saw corpses and bits of rubble begin to float up into the air, up into the sky. One man later described what he had seen to the police, saying, "It was as if they were floating on the water that was falling from the sky." The authorities dismissed this account, but the SCP Foundation knew better. This had to be another Trollge incident. Indeed, it was. And on Joseph's computer, they found the guilty meme. Oil is lighter than water. Step 1, cover yourself in oil. Step 2, feels good. Step 3, cover others in oil. Step 4, data expunged. Somehow this particular instance of SCP-6661 had managed to alter the laws of physics, to bend them to its will. It was a troubling development, and not something they cared to see repeated. Containment procedures were swiftly put into place. Web crawlers monitored the internet for any appearances of Trollge, particularly those that seemed to have cognitohazardous properties. If they could track these instances and delete them from circulation, perhaps they could prevent any more needless destruction. During the monitoring process, some of the web crawlers detected an instance of SCP-6661-1 with a heavily distorted concluding step. Before expunging this step, Junior researcher Mikel Ramirez edited out the distortion and scanned the image through a spectrogram generator. This was, it should be noted, without prior authorization. The spectrogram generated audio, 3 recognizable words. Junior researcher Ramirez was reprimanded for breaching protocol, but his work proved to be valuable enough to warrant additional research. With the sign-off of the O5 Council, a spectrogram was constructed with a reply to this question and spread through the internet. The Foundation's response was, "Yes, we see you. Who are you? And why are you doing this?" Within 24 hours of the Foundation's response, another SCP-6661-1 instance with a similar distortion was found. The distortion was isolated and scanned through a spectrogram generator once more. It stated, This revelation gave the Foundation a new theory on the nature of SCP-6661. The initial Trollface meme was so popular, so widespread and beloved, that the collective energy directed towards it created a thought form able to manifest via the meme. When Trollface declined in popularity over the years, the thought form became desperate to achieve the same relevance again. It gravitated towards darker subject matter, toward the shocking and disturbing in order to get attention. This resulted in the creation of SCP-6661-1, an opportunity for the thought form to feel seen again. When it does not feel seen, when it is not fed energy and attention, the thought form becomes weak and desperate. The cognitohazardous effects may not be deliberate at all, but rather an unfortunate side effect of this particular manifestation. An additional theory was proposed: the way to limit the effects of SCP-6661-1, to perhaps even eradicate it, is to make the original Trollface popular again. The troll must be fed. At first, the Foundation was reluctant to put this theory into practice. It seemed patently absurd to many of the higher-ups, but the percentage of susceptible individuals began to increase, and more incidents occurred. In July of 2021, residents of a small Virginia town began to go missing, one by one, until over a dozen people had mysteriously disappeared. There appeared to be no common link between the missing persons until one unlikely thread surfaced, tying them all together. Shortly before their disappearance, each person had eaten a meal at Billy's Burgers, the local burger joint. Police interrogated all employees, but no new information turned up. They checked security camera footage, but only one of the cameras at the small local business was operational, and it only captured the restaurant's main entrance. It was beginning to look like one more dead lead. That is, until one of the investigating officers heard his stomach rumble and decided to grab a burger and fries for the road. Back at the police station, the officer sat down to enjoy his lunch, taking a big, juicy bite out of his burger. Suddenly, he felt something hard crack against his tooth. He reached into his mouth and fished it out. At first, he didn't believe his eyes, but sure enough, there was a human finger bone. He hopped back in his police car, drove back to Billy's Burgers, and demanded to investigate the kitchen. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary right away, but he trusted his gut and the bite of the burger that he had almost put it in. He confiscated the freshly ground meat and had it analyzed. The results came back, and his stomach dropped. It was human. Once more, the police officer drove back to the burger joint. This time, his lights were flashing, his siren was blaring, and he was ready to make an arrest. When he arrived, the place was eerily quiet. All the lights were off. He drew his weapon and crept toward the back, where he found the fry cook, Jeffrey Toombs, operating the meat grinder. Next to the machine, he could make out bloody scraps of employee uniforms, and suddenly realized why the place was so quiet. Jeffrey was making his coworkers into burgers. He arrested Jeffrey and brought the young man into custody. All he would say over and over again was, I made them better. The SCP Foundation caught wind of this horrifying case and arrived to conduct their own investigation. They found another cognitohazardous meme. This one read, "Everyone loves burgers. Step 1. Get job at a burger place. Step 2. Improve on the recipe. Step 3. Source your own meat. Step 4. Profit. Step 5. Expunged. The Foundation attempted to interrogate Jeffrey as well, but he was still not forthcoming. He did say one thing, however. He requested that for his dying meal in prison, he be given a burger. After this incident, the order was given. The Trollface experiment would be carried out. A team of researchers, sociologists, and statisticians was assembled and asked to design images and media involving Trollface, now designated SCP-6661-2. The images were then disseminated across the Foundation intranet, attempting to saturate the media with this mimetic agent until it achieved a status colloquially known as dank. This team was designated Task Force Hexa 9 Meme Machine. The initial experiment was a success, and the incidents began to slightly reduce. The all-clear was given, and SCP-661-2 was disseminated across the internet. Again, incident numbers decreased. This allowed for standard containment procedures to be put in place, procedures still in use today. The Foundation has established a think tank to observe the trends and popularity of SCP-6661-2. If its popularity declines, the think tank will evaluate the best course of action to take. SCP-661-2 based mimetic agents are to be spread across various social media sites and the internet at large, as well as the Foundation intranet. Foundation web crawlers must consistently scan the internet at large for instances of SCP-6661-1 and look for active SCP-6661-1 events. If any instances are found, the concluding instructions must be redacted whenever possible. Any personnel that is going to deal directly with SCP-6661-1 must be mimetically inoculated before being assigned to the anomaly. Oh, wait, it seems as though there's one more mimetically infected comic. Let's see here.
The SCP Foundation has faced a number of wide, potentially apocalyptic threats in its mission to uphold normalcy and save humanity. We know the SCP Foundation could be ruthless in this mission. The events of SCP-5000 before Agent Pietro restarted the universe show what happens when the Foundation is pushed to its final decisions regarding normalcy being upheld. In SCP-5000, it seemed that the SCP Foundation decided to cease research further into the anomaly they needed to neutralize. But what would have happened if they didn't? In any case, we know the SCP Foundation is dedicated to normalcy and the containment of the anomalous. But what happens when the SCP Foundation is faced with a dire decision: uphold normalcy or destroy their universe? The multiverse is a concept in science fiction that has gained mass amounts of popularity over recent years, especially recently thanks to a certain wall crawlers movie. Multiverses are parallel universes that are similar or extremely different from the main ones. Scientists have pondered over the existence of a multiverse for hundreds of years, with the most popular being the many worlds interpretation, a theory of quantum mechanics that states there are many worlds that exist in parallel at the same space and time as our own. Some interpretations even state that every decision a person makes causes a branch in reality where the person made the other decision. We're familiar with the SCP Foundation's run-ins with the multiverse, from SCP-2935-0 Death, a cave that allows the Wanderer to enter a parallel dimension that's fully and completely dead, only for the same thing to happen to their own world once they return through the cave, or SCP-1437, a hole that allows the Foundation to send, receive, and read parallel dimensional documentation from other multiversal SCP Foundations. Combine those two concepts with an SCP-001 proposal. The importance of an SCP-001 proposal is not lost on the Foundation. Researchers of the SCP Foundation saved the SCP-001 slot for only the most dangerous, apocalyptic, or widespread anomalies that could affect the Foundation itself, humanity, and normalcy. Arbalic's SCP-001 proposal and the research within its file found the answer to the question we posed above. When the SCP Foundation is faced with a dire decision, do they uphold normalcy or destroy their universe and all the people who live in it? The file begins somewhat different from what we're used to with SCP Foundation files. Instead of an item number or containment procedures, we begin with a yellow notice from the Records and Information Security Administration, or RAISA for short. The notice states that the following file was received in 2026
from Dimension R42. Is Dimension R42 potentially the cause of SCP-001? Could they be attacking this version of the SCP Foundation? The notice continues with the description of the file that follows it. It states the file below describes an anomaly threatening all members of humankind in all of the multiverse. This file had been emitted to this version of the SCP Foundation for 8 minutes as an extremely dangerous cognitohazard, classified as a Class 5 cognitohazard capable of easily destabilizing and penetrating this universe. However, it was found to not be dangerous, only reading as a danger level 0. While this Foundation was unable to quickly counteract this cognitohazard, it appeared to not pose a threat to the affected universe's humankind. Part of this notice is crossed out, indicating that it is no longer true. There is a high threat of repeated cognitohazardous or other forms of attack from Dimension R42. Instead, this part has been replaced with the following fact. Dimension R42 no longer exists. Did this version's SCP Foundation fall to SCP-001? Their entire universe no longer exists, so perhaps this file that this dimension's SCP Foundation received could be a potential warning. Under this race and notice, the reader is not greeted with the standard Foundation documentation yet again. Instead, it seems that the original senders of this file left a note for the readers of this file. It says, "Greetings. You are reading this dossier in a paradimension of the relict dimension R42. Due to the colossal size of your world's address, for your convenience, your dimension will be hereafter referred to as PD. Paradimensions." It seems as though we're reading this SCP-001 file through the eyes of the SCP Foundation in this so-called paradimension. So, if the original SCP Foundation and their universe, R42, is now destroyed, what does this mean for us? The note continues. The following message has been constructed by the SCP Foundation of the Relic Dimension R42 and is addressed to the SCP Foundation of Paradimension PD. Enclosed, you will find information about SCP-001, which is a threat to the multiverse. Here we go. SCP-001 is definitely the cause of R42's destruction. But how can we be so sure of this? Maybe SCP-001 caused the Foundation to destroy their universe. The note also includes the following statement. As you may have noticed, this message was preceded by a burst signal containing a non-dangerous cognitohazard. The burst signal was constructed in such a way that minimal change to the signal would have caused indiscriminate and overwhelming casualties among the denizens of PD. As you can see, R42 is capable of eliminating the absolute majority of PD denizens, but has not exercised this capability. In the context above, we ask you to consider this action not as an act of aggression, but as a demonstration of the fact that R42 has no pretension for conquest or other forms of aggression towards PD. Take the following information in earnest. Well, at least this version of the SCP Foundation is being somewhat friendly with the paradimension. If R42's SCP Foundation needs to quell this multiversal threat though, why are they leaving it up to an SCP Foundation that may not be so inclined? The SCP-001 file begins with the object class. This anomaly is of the joint class of Paradox Apollyon. We know from SCP-001 When Day Breaks or SCP-3999 that Apollyon-class anomalies are extremely dangerous, posing an immediate and almost unstoppable threat to normalcy, the SCP Foundation, all of humanity, or even the universe itself. The paradox part is interesting. What exactly is paradoxical about an Apollyon-class anomaly? A footnote explains this for us. This anomaly's distinguishing feature is that, in order to eliminate the anomaly that will inevitably eliminate mankind, it is imperative to eliminate mankind or release another K-class event. Oh boy. It seems that the SCP Foundation of R42 was not eliminated by SCP-001. They eliminated themselves to contain SCP-001. Is this paradimension faced with this decision now? The containment procedures of the SCP file continue on this note. The only way to contain SCP-001 and prevent a ZK-class cross-reality failure event is the annihilation of humankind. K-class scenarios are not a concept used lightly by the SCP Foundation. We're familiar with the Omega K-class scenario when we are completely rid of death, or XK-class end-of-the-world scenarios, so we know the danger these anomalies hold to humankind, normalcy, and the world. The SCP Foundation will do anything to prevent these scenarios from occurring, apparently even including the elimination of all humankind or entire universes. The description goes more in depth on the SCP-001 anomaly. SCP-001 consists of all living members of the Homo sapiens species living within Dimension R42 and the Paradimension, or PD for short. It seems as though this anomaly was created out of a mistake from Dimension R42 and PD. As the description states, the anomaly first came into existence and developed in the relic Dimension R42 and later activated in PD by accident. How could this have happened? Are these dimensions linked much more closely than we first thought? Let's continue with the description to find more information. Scarily, this portion of the description contains a note that states that unchecked growth of SCP-001 will cause the annihilation of the entire multiverse. The SCP Foundations of Dimension R42 and PD are not met with this decision, as now the entire multiverse is at risk. The R42 SCP Foundation has done immense research on the topic of the multiverse of their universe. After the Big Bang, a finite number of universes were created, only 57 to be exact. However, only one dimension was able to form humanity, Dimension R42, and it's unknown why this happened. But all we know is that with the destruction of R42 and the potential annihilation of PD, humanity will cease to exist in the multiverse. The danger of SCP-001 is that it has the anomalous capability for wide-scale replication of paradimensions. We are reading this article from one of these paradimensions, so this SCP Foundation is technically an anomaly that must contain itself. A paradimension is defined as a parallel reality that has an extremely small deviation from its parent dimension. In this case, PD is a paradimension of R42. It seems that these paradimensions form as a result of human decision-making. So if you've ever been between a type of shirt to buy or were confused on an exam and guessed a question, a paradimension could have formed from this decision, where the paradimension has you take the other choice. Because of this, dimensions housing living instances of SCP-001 uncontrollably grow a colossal number of minimally differing paradimensions every second. No sign of paradimensions have been found in the other 56 parent dimensions. The picture on this file shows how PD has branched from R42, but at this point, it seems that millions, if not billions or trillions of paradimensions now exist. The real problem of paradimensions is that the multiverse has a limit on the number of paradimensions that can exist, and once that is crossed, the ZK-class cross-reality failure event will begin, and the multiverse will be destroyed. The R42 Dimensions SCP Foundation has also discovered that once humankind emerges in the paradimension, they can begin to have paradimensions themselves. The ZK-class cross-reality failure event can be expected to begin between 4 to 2 months from the PD receiving this message. To summarize, SCP-001 is humankind, specifically its decision-making. When a person makes a decision, a paradimension may be created. The multiverse has a limit on the number of paradimensions it can have, and since paradimensions can have paradimensions, they are quickly approaching the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. The SCP Foundation of R42 is approximately 17 years ahead of PD, which allowed them to research and develop containment procedures to contain the anomaly and save the multiverse. R42's SCP Foundation discovered SCP-001 5 years before writing the file we're reading now. Aside from that, they developed 2 operations, Castling and Minimal Gain, to slow paradimension creation and prevent the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. In Stage 1 of Operation Minimal Gain, the Foundation began with neutralizing and decommissioning all of their contained anomalies under the classification of Euclid or Keter, specifically those that were expensive to contain or requiring high levels of personnel and researchers. Stage 2 saw Operation Castling be commenced. The R-42 SCP Foundation launched rockets with variant C global amnestic dispersing warheads and took control over all countries in order to hold power over all humankind. In Stage 3, the Foundation began to move their world to a more natural state, destroying all hazardous, radioactive, chemical, and bacteriological objects, removing dams, and stopping oil extractions. During Stage 3, Stage 4 began. The R-42 SCP Foundation began eliminating humanity in third world countries by use of viral and biological attacks. Stage 5 was a wider spread attack on humanity, where the SCP Foundation added deactivation-resistant viral agents to water treatment and collection plants, food products, medication, and household items of developed countries. By Stage 6, only 0.1% of humanity remained, and they were targeted with drone strikes or put into concentration camps for elimination. Stage 7. Of the remaining survivors, the Foundation sampled them to find the fittest of those left to preserve humankind. Stage 8 saw 15,000 of these people put into indefinite cryosleep, and the remaining survivors were eliminated. Stage 9 saw the destruction of the remaining SCP Foundation personnel. We move on to a list of proposals that were made before or during Operations Castling and Minimal Gain. Proposals rejected include the use of SCP objects or other technologies to eliminate derivative dimensions, the development of nanobots with the capability to control human decision-making capabilities and eliminate variability, full replacement of humanity with bionic hybrids acting explicitly within standard behavioral models, unification of humanity into a neural network with control given to an AI control unit, and the destruction of Earth and/or all of its inhabitants. While most of these seem like clear solutions that would prevent the elimination of humanity at the SCP Foundation's hand, these proposals were all rejected for one reason: the SCP Foundation did not have enough time. One proposal was accepted, however: the use of SCP-0000. This appears to be the solution the R-42 SCP Foundation concocted to fight SCP-001 and potentially save the multiverse. It poses the question: if the R-42 SCP Foundation used this same anomaly to contain SCP-001, as proven by the fact they no longer exist, will PD do the same? The file explains that the R-42 SCP Foundation opened a dimensional wormhole into PD, as they do not know at the time if paradimensions could cause the creation of more paradimensions. In doing this, the SCP Foundation seemingly infected PD with the ability to create paradimensions. The author of this file goes on to explain that the R-42 SCP Foundation had plans to attack PD and use Operations Castling and Minimal Gain in the dimension. However, they could not access the dimension again, and they believe that the Foundation personnel of PD would have made use of Thaumiel-class anomalies to save themselves and their world. A note from R-42's Overseer Council is left for PD. If the Apollyon destruction was not enough, the Overseer Council is involved. The importance of the neutralization of this anomaly cannot be forgotten, so the Overseer Council explained to PD: "The world has existed before us and must remain after us. Our multiverse is ill, and the name of the illness is humanity. SCP-001. The only way out is SCP-0000 will cease to become a threat with its help. It is in our power to leave a chance for other sapient species that, perhaps, will not be affected by the same anomaly, or will find a way to get rid of it before it's too late. We, the O5 Council, and other survivors from R-42 have chosen our fate. We hope you will do the same." What is this SCP-0000? How did the SCP Foundation of R-42 find this solution? The file for SCP-0000 is placed within this SCP-001 file. SCP-0000 is a Paradox Thaumiel-class anomaly without any containment procedures. SCP-0000 is a device that, once activated, will destroy the universe it was activated in. It will also destroy all paradimensions that are not creating other paradimensions. As such, PD would not be destroyed. However, the billions or trillions of other paradimensions the R-42 parent dimension created will be destroyed. PD is left with the harrowing decision to continue living, or destroy itself to save the rest of the multiverse. In the file, a note from R42's Joan Simpson is written for an SCP Foundation Overseer 05-1. As part of Operations Castling and Minimal Gain, the remaining Foundation employees were allowed one family member to uphold morale. Joan is not writing for R42's 05-1. Instead, she's writing for PD's 05-1, this dimension's version of her father. She begins with wondering whether she can call this version of 05-1 her father, as her version of her father recently passed away. She remembers the day the Foundation employees were allowed to choose that one family member they would save for the time being. Her father was opposed to allowing two family members, as he claimed it would cause unnecessary stress and schisms among the remaining few hundred Foundation staff. 05-1 chose to have Joan over her mother, and she understood everything by the look in his eyes, and grew angry, but that feeling is long gone now. She began to work with her father and the remaining Foundation personnel that called themselves hostages behind the backs of those higher up the ranks. On days she felt sad, Joan and her father would go up to the surface of the earth in hazmat suits, sitting on the grass and watching over the empty city at the bottom of the mountain. No humanity remained, with the only life she could see being birds. Her father promised her that they'd return there and build a giant monument to humanity at the center of the city. She knew this was a lie. Joan remembers when someone proposed that they should open a portal, the one that opened to PD. This was their fatal mistake, as after that the paradimension began replicating paradimensions. The countdown went down to months again, and the promise he made to his daughter became impossible. 05-1 died and left the position vacant. Joan says to the PD's 05-1 that she doesn't care whether they destroy their world or not, or whether the universe will continue to exist, or if there will be new life in it. Her world was crushed long ago. The note also reads the following: "It's good that this message is encrypted with your key that was passed on to me, or these lines would have been deleted. Everyone wants to save the world, but who needs it like this? Empty and cold, without those to appreciate its beauty, without humanity. Do whatever you think is right. I truly feel better now. Love you. Faithfully yours, Joan Simpson." We're not too sure if PD went through with destroying their universe to save the multiverse, but it seems that whatever decision was made would cause the destruction of that universe, whether that be through the use of SCP-0000 or the ZK-class cross-reality failure event. Humanity will cease. But maybe if they make the decision to use SCP-0000, sapient life can begin to exist again, and hopefully, no paradimensions will be made from their decisions. Decisions are an extremely innate part of humanity. You decided to get out of bed this morning. You decided to open up your computer or phone, and you decided to watch this video. Who knows the amount of paradimensions we may have created today? But in our world, we're not at risk. But in the SCP Foundation's universe, anything can be anomalous, even humanity. It has been said that 1 is the loneliest number that you will ever know. But at least the number 1 is a number that can actually be known. What could we possibly mean by that? We'll try to imagine a number that cannot possibly be known or quantified. A missing number, if you will. No, not that one. This is a number that you can never put into an equation or a formula, and it does not appear in the numerical sequence. You cannot count to it, add to, divide, or multiply by it, or even see it. And yet this number still somehow exists. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? After all, the mathematicians among you will understand that the numbers are not a force of nature. They aren't a metaphysical aspect of our reality like space or time. Numbers are a tool, in a way. A tool created by human beings. We use them to measure and calculate. Numbers help us make some sense of this crazy world that we all live in. Just ask your math teacher, and they'll tell you how important numbers are to human civilization. The point is, ancient mathematicians invented numbers, so how could a number ever be missing? What makes a number unknowable? Well, perhaps it's time you learned. Math class is in session, and today we're talking about SCP-033, also known by the appropriate nickname of the missing number. As you may have already gathered, the whole point of SCP-033 is that it can't fully be understood by the ordinary human mind. Even highly trained mathematicians, experts in the use of numbers, able to understand the most complex equations, are barely able to interpret the formula that results in this missing number. At present, it exists written down on an irregularly shaped piece of paper. This paper does not have any right angles, no parallel borders, and the length of each side is different from all others. The SCP Foundation keeps this paper stored securely, locked up at the minimum safe distance of 30 meters away from any computer or other electronic device. On the paper itself is the mathematical formula that equals SCP-033. As you can probably imagine, the formula is intensely complex. It is filled with mathematical symbols ranging from common ones that you would immediately recognize, to those that are way more sophisticated and would likely require a PhD to fully understand. And then there are parts of this unfathomable problem that would baffle even the world's most notable math geniuses. But all these symbols and numbers coalesce to equal a number that has somehow been missed by all of humanity throughout the entire history of our civilization. One noted mathematician by the name of Professor Hutchinson, who first observed the calculation of SCP-033, referred to the missing number as theta prime. Okay, so here we have a number that can barely be understood by the average person, created by a formula so complex that when written down it might as well be a page full of gibberish. Surely there couldn't be anything more to it than that, right? Wrong. You should know by now that the SCP Foundation doesn't concern themselves with the mundane, ordinary type of strange. They deal exclusively in the kind of strange that has anomalous origins and properties. In the case of SCP-033, the missing number is so complex that it practically breaks every and all rules of mathematics. In other words, theta prime cannot possibly remain fixed within our reality. The reason why the paper theta prime is written on has to have such unusual dimensions is due to the anomalous effect of the number. When written on ordinary paper, canvas, or any other similar surface or material, the missing number will begin to break down whatever it has been written on. It will literally erode and disintegrate anything on a molecular level. You might be forgiven for thinking you could get around that by typing out the equation for theta prime on a computer, but you would be wrong. This reaction even affects technology, burning out any and all devices someone attempts to digitally store SCP-033 on. And if written on literally anything else, well then the missing number will fade, become obscured and unintelligible in a matter of seconds, unreadable to anyone. We've talked a lot about what SCP-033 does, mainly because we can't really show or tell you what it looks like. Well, unless you want your computer, phone, or tablet to break down and melt from the inside out. Like we mentioned earlier, theta prime cannot remain fixed in our reality, and it will fade away from any surface or destroy any devices used to display or calculate it. But the anomalous effects of the missing number do not stop there. SCP-033 also possesses the ability to leap from any safe material, like the paper of specific dimensions that it is written and stored on. That is why the safe containing the paper with the missing number equations written on it has to be kept a certain distance away from any electronic devices or other surfaces that can display theta prime. Should a material safely storing SCP-033 come into contact with anything unsafe, say a computer, then the missing number will pass on to the unsafe device, material, or surface and begin to destabilize its atomic structure. Any paper or electronic storage device within a 30-meter safe distance of SCP-033 risks becoming a victim of theta prime, almost as if the number itself is an infectious virus. Although the SCP Foundation's top researchers have tried their best to find one, there currently exists no safe way to store SCP-033 digitally. The Foundation has a number of projects that are still ongoing, looking into the best possible method to store the missing number electronically, without posing a risk to their computer systems. Additionally, the Foundation has long been conducting research of a different nature, trying to find some way of weaponizing SCP-033. It doesn't seem like a bad idea, right? After all, theta prime functions a lot like a computer virus when it comes into contact with machines. So why wouldn't they try to use it as a weapon? It is the goal of these projects that the Foundation will be able to use the missing number as a way to neutralize hostile machine SCPs. Any anomalies that they encounter that operate on logic-based systems, such as artificial intelligences, could in theory be susceptible to the destructive effects of SCP-033. Within the SCP archive file for the missing number is a classified article that details more about the discovery of SCP-033. Before going on to explore the results of the Foundation's testing with Theta Prime's use as a cyber weapon of sorts. First and foremost is a transcript from a debriefing with Professor Hutchison. If you were paying attention earlier, then you will remember that this is the same Professor Hutchison that first observed SCP-033. And as a noted mathematician, he has some invaluable inside knowledge on the nature of Theta Prime, as he calls it.
Every schoolchild knows that 2 + 2 is 4. The solid mathematical certainty of numerical order and value is the basis for all logic-based systems. We know that after 2 comes 3 and after 3 comes 4. What this formula proves is that we missed a number somewhere. Imagine if all our technology was based on the belief that after 4 came 6. We simply didn't know or conceive of 5. That is, in essence, what this formula proves. We missed a number.
The professor then goes on to ponder why handcrafted vellum works the best for containing SCP-033. Vellum is essentially an older type of fine parchment that originally would have been made from the skin of a calf or other young animal. Professor Hutchinson seems to theorize that there are 2 ways this particular material is able to keep SCP-033 written on it.
1. The irregularity of the crafting process due to human error serves to eliminate any traces of regularity that would be found in a machine-created product. 2. The irregular borders seem to confuse it somehow, as if it gets locked up looking for a pattern to identify and use as an escape hatch. I'll tell you this though. I don't think it should be left on anything longer than a few days. It will find a pattern eventually.
Finally, Professor Hutchinson then goes on to talk about the anomalous effects of the missing number, specifically its ability to destroy materials or computers that it comes into contact with. Hutchinson posits a theory that Theta Prime does not actually destroy anything, but instead tries to integrate itself into a system or onto a page. But the system or page cannot cope with the missing number, and so breaks down. It is almost as if he thinks the number itself wants to be understood. It longs for humanity to understand it after having been missed for so very, very long. But Theta Prime is so utterly beyond our understanding that it has the potential to be devastating.
It's like trying to cram another book into a completely full bookshelf. If you get a hammer, you can get it in there, but the whole shelf bursts eventually. If it gets out into the internet, we will potentially experience a full IT infrastructure collapse within hours.
During one of their numerous tests with SCP-033, the Foundation's researchers wrote the various equations and formulae that equal Theta Prime on a standard piece of white copy paper, referred to as X1. Then they placed a second sheet, X2, just 30 centimeters away from X1. Within about a minute, the same mathematical symbols and formulae on X1 had started to appear on X2. After 160 seconds, the second page was full with the complex equation for the missing number. After around 5 minutes, both X1 and X2 began to appear slightly damp. However, Theta Prime and its related equations were still visible on the pages. After double that time, the first page X1 had begun to separate, dissolving partly into water and the rest into the pulp that had formed the paper itself. While it still kept the same standard shape and size, the formulae written on it had since become unreadable. X2 was still wet as well, but SCP-033 was still visible. After over 21 minutes had passed, X1 had been completely destroyed. The water component of it had evaporated, and the paper pulp had also disappeared. The second page, X2, soon followed the exact same process of being structurally broken down and unmade atom by atom, until there was nothing left. It becomes terrifying to think what might happen if you wrote the equations for the missing number on another human being. While their testing has yet to produce any tangible results, the Foundation staff always make sure they transfer the missing number onto a whiteboard or chalkboard whenever studying it. Upon doing so, researchers are instructed to incinerate the paper that SCP-033 was written on previously, preventing multiple instances of Theta Prime and hopefully stopping the number from spreading any further. Any researchers observing or experimenting with SCP-033 must do so within a safe distance, away from computers and other devices. Testing can only occur for a maximum of 42 minutes before the missing number will destroy the surface it is written on, or fade from view. While dangerous, volatile, and potentially hugely destructive if it ever fell into the wrong hands, Theta Prime is a strangely insightful SCP. Knowing there exists a missing number must be similar to how mathematicians felt about the introduction of variables. You will probably have seen these a lot in your algebra homework. Find the value of x and so on. Like SCP-033, that is also a number that cannot fully exist in our reality unless you figure out its value. It influences the calculations you have to make to find it, but it cannot be seen or understood fully at first. Perhaps there will come a day where we can store the missing number properly, but until then, we can only hope it never finds its way into our favorite notebook. There's a quote that says, "The beautiful thing about learning is nobody can take it away from you. But what good is learning if the knowledge might hurt you, drive you mad, or even kill you? It just sits there in your mind, like a stick of dynamite with an invisible fuse. It could blow at any moment. All it take is a careless slip of the tongue, and you might turn into a talking home appliance." This is a conundrum faced by anyone dealing with an info hazard, a certain kind of anomaly often dealt with by the SCP Foundation. Before we get into some of the craziest examples of info hazards and what they've done to people, because let's face it, that's what you're really here for. First, we have to answer that big question everyone's a little afraid to ask. Just what is an info hazard? And how does it differ from a far more common type of SCP, the dreaded Cognitohazard? Well, we're glad you're finally brave enough to ask. First, cognitohazards are anomalies that are dangerous to perceive through one of the senses. A well-known example is SCP-096, which is actually a visual cognitohazard. You see its face and you're toast. It's as simple as that. And cognitohazards exist for all of the other senses too: hearing, taste, touch, even smell. Info hazards, on the other hand, are different. These anomalous effects are triggered when you start trying to express or describe something about what you've perceived. And when you do, things start to get really weird, really fast. Maybe you're trying to explain what you just saw to family members, friends, or the police. Maybe you're a member of SCP Foundation staff trying to write up a report or a new experiment log. Or maybe you're a YouTube channel trying to create entertaining yet informative breakdowns and explanations of anomalies from the SCP Foundation. If any or all of these apply to you, then info hazards are going to be your worst enemy. But as we look at some of the strangest examples, we'll try our best to resist their effects. First, seeing as it's so hot out, how about we take a relaxing dip in the pool while we tell you all about SCP-1128. What is SCP-1128? Well, that's a loaded question. Technically speaking, it's a massive predatory aquatic creature. But despite its huge size, the creature can hunt its prey in any body of water. Whether you're stepping in a puddle, relaxing in the bath, or say chilling out in the pool, SCP-1128 can track you down and potentially eat you alive. In one particularly horrifying test, a D-Class was drinking from a simple glass of water when the aquatic predator emerged, yanked them inside, and ate them. Okay, so maybe you're feeling a little nervous now, but don't worry, you're still safe. Some people have even survived their attacks from SCP-1128. Well, their initial attacks anyway. The creature has a tendency to come back again and again, relentless in its ravenous hunger for human flesh. Whenever it attacks successfully, all that's left is some blood floating on the water. But again, please don't worry too much about this creature. We don't have another 682 on our hands. After all, it's an info hazard. It can only start hunting you if you receive a written or verbal description of the creature. Oh, or some kind of visual representation of the creature too. Actually, on second thought, you might want to get out of the pool now. And put down that drink too. Instead, let us tell you a nice little story. You step into a bar, smelling of fine liquor and rich mahogany. You even get a whiff of some fine leather-bound book. You see us sitting at the bar, motioning for you to come over, and you decide to approach. You're intrigued by our winning smile and our vast knowledge of anomalies and SCP Foundation lore. You take a seat next to us and order a drink. Get something fancy. It's on our tab after all. Our treat. What does this have to do with info hazards, you ask? That's the thing about SCP-1893, kid. We say, our dulcet tones smoother than scotch. You can never just talk about it. It's an info hazard that forces information about it to be delivered like a story. That's why we're in this bar right now. That's the setup. It expresses actual information about itself through the dialogue, see? You nod, beginning to grasp the concept as the bartender serves you your drink. It's been forever since you've been to a bar. Feels good to be out again, honestly. You drink deeply, savoring the flavor, but you almost choke when you see the man standing in the corner. He's so large and so distinctive, it surprises you that you hadn't noticed him before now. He stands in the corner, a freakishly tall and muscular guy, like a basketball player who decided to become a pro bodybuilder. His muscular arms are bulging out of his white vest, and a pair of bull's horns are tattooed across the top of his bald head, making him look like the devil made flesh. He stares at you with a subdued kind of annoyance, as if to say that you're not in real danger quite yet, but if he wanted, he could grab you and twist your head off like a bottle cap. What's with the huge guy, you ask us, more than a little concern in your voice? Oh, him? We reply with a smirk. He comes with the anomaly. He appears in every SCP-1893 experience to an extent, though his level of involvement varies. If SCP-1893 doesn't perceive you as an annoyance or a threat, then you're good to go. But if 1893 starts to feel like you're gonna cause it some problems, then the guy with the horn tattoos is gonna intervene. Speaking of which, you look up and you see that the giant man is now standing next to you, brow furrowed in visible rage. He picks up your drink and crushes the glass in his hand without flinching, dripping booze and blood onto the counter. He snarls, "I think you've had enough, buddy. Now it's time for you to leave, or we're gonna have to get physical. Gabish?" You don't need to be told twice. You grab your hat, get up and leave the bar, abandoning us on our lonely stool. But our next info hazard still awaits.
You like poetry? Japanese poetry, yes? The humble haiku. It's Dear 931, a unique info hazard. It's so poetic.
Though specifically it takes the form of haiku. So what does that mean? A rigid structure. The first line 5 syllables, then 7, then 5. We can't talk about this in ways other than haiku. It is challenging. Object class is safe. It is kept at Site 19. Need 3rd tier clearance. So what is this thing? SCP-931. It is a rice bowl, white with a blue band and a cracked blue pattern, all inside the bowl. And we must confess, we took that one from the file. Man, haikus are hard. 3 inches in height, 4.5 inches across. Metric doesn't fit. No maker's marks found. Suspected to have been made late 1900s. Really makes you think on the skill of these poets. Sans anomalies. Sure, it can't kill you, but writing these drives you mad. Curse 931. Trapped in this rhythm scheme makes the old man's torture world look like a resort. Okay, let's move on. Other SCPs to see. We're sick of haiku. Okay, back to normal. Time to shake off the structures of SCP-931 and talk about another iconic info hazard, SCP-3007. This incurable info hazard is a lot less whimsical than a rice bowl that forces you to write and speak in haiku. In fact, it's literally killed 7 people, and some in surprisingly gruesome ways. The main component of the info hazard is known as SCP-3007-1. This is an extremely vivid anomalous hallucination that affects those under the 3007 umbrella, known as SCP-3007-2. To be afflicted with SCP-3007 is a truly horrifying and debilitating condition. The hallucinations occur at an average of 4 times a day, with each episode lasting for as long as an hour. And during these episodes, the victims are at risk of grievous bodily harm, or even death. So the question now is, what exactly is the SCP-3007-1 hallucination? To the people experiencing it, they appear to be transported to a strange alien world consisting of a huge number of white towers or pillars stretching into the sky.
SCP-3007-2 specimens are trapped on a series of bridges, incredibly far off the ground, that connect these various structures. This anomalous area is known as SCP-3007-3. It is important to remember that people transported to this world still remain, physically, in our own. However, any damage sustained with SCP-3007-3 will carry over into our own reality. To give one particularly gruesome example, some people fall from the precarious bridges and tumble to their deaths in SCP-3007-3. Back in our reality, they suddenly explode from the damage of an invisible high-speed impact, killing them instantly. There's much more to SCP-3007, enough that it probably warrants its own explanation, and the SCP Foundation takes it extremely seriously, believing that if the info hazard is allowed to breach containment and become contagious, it could result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. As a result, anyone found to be infected by SCP-3007 is contained and summarily terminated to reduce the risk of its spreading. To make things even worse, there are also concerns about SCP-3007-3 seeping into our reality, as those standing within a 2-meter range of SCP-3007-2 during a 3007-1 episode can actually hear the sounds from the terrifying hallucinatory reality. Okay, that was a little scary. How about instead of falling to your death without falling at all, we talk about a nice movie? Gonershrav by Martin Scorsese, one of the best gangster movies of all time. Wait, you've never heard of Gonershrav? It's got everything. Action, suspense, romance, a mountain of black thorns on which lives a dark tyrant of terrible and unknowable power. You sure you've never seen Gonershrav? Well, here's the thing. All signs point to movies like Gonershrav's and many others simply not existing. This comes as a result of SCP-6747, an infohazardous phenomenon that causes people to talk about works of fiction that don't exist. These works often feature commonalities, like an ethereal or disturbing tone, ambiguity, black thorns, and a sinister, mysterious antagonist. The Foundation is doing all they can to hunt down and suppress SCP-2747, but it's proving more difficult than they'd imagined. Currently, the leading hypothesis is that these tales may have actually existed once, but were erased from reality, leaving only the residue of memory and the odd scrap of evidence around. Many researchers speculate that the various pieces that form SCP-2747 are anafabula, pieces of fiction accidentally composed with the perfect elements to cause them to quite literally erase themselves over time. Now, the greatest concern that the Foundation has about these anafabulas is that they might actually be one, and their reality is on the precipice of collapse. But we really don't have time to unpack that right now, and like SCP-3007, a full explanation of this anomaly would take some time and is probably best tackled on its own. But there you have it, folks, info hazards. They all say that knowing is half the battle, but in this case, it is the whole battle, and if you know, you lose. Not really a battle at all, come to think of it. More of a trap. But whether it's a vicious megafish, a strangely buff man with bull tattoos, a poetic rice bowl, or a nightmarish ordeal of daily hallucinations, there is no doubt that info hazards are some of the most strange and fascinating anomalies that the Foundation has to offer.
Oh, and of course, how could we forget the most well-known info hazard of all, SCP-2521. This entity is so info-hazardous that its Foundation file entry is written in pictograms. This is because whenever information is recorded about this entity, it manifests and steals it. If you write it down, it'll take the paper. If you make a note of it on a computer, it'll take the computer. And of course, if you talk about it, it'll... Oh no, 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 again, no, 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 no! Ah! Oh, that was a close one. But I'm okay. For now, at least. But don't worry about me. Who among us hasn't wondered what happens after our lives have come to their inevitable ending, and we play out our final moments in the land of the living? The concept of what happens to us after we've died has baffled scientists and philosophers the world over for almost as long as human civilization has existed. Some out there already claim to know the exact answer. You probably already know that the belief in the existence of an afterlife is one held by almost every single religion and culture around the globe. Heaven, hell, Valhalla, purgatory, limbo, Sheol, the world to come. Descriptions of the afterlife and how to get sent there often varies depending on the religion or cultural group it is linked to. But to think in more general terms, the concept usually revolves around the soul leaving the body after death and living forever in eternal paradise. That is, of course, unless you've committed any deadly sins during your lifetime. If the myths are to be believed, these normally result in you being sent down to spend eternity in damnation and endless punishment instead of paradise. Sadly, there's no way to prove if any of the various afterlives actually exist. By their very nature, these afterlives exist separate from the real physical world that we live in while we are still alive. While we're here on Earth, we can only observe what we see happening to a body after death, and what we assume or believe the afterlife might be like. After all, it's not like any deceased person can tell us what being dead is like. Well, not under the normal circumstances anyway. With no proof of the afterlife's existence, we do unfortunately get left with the bleak and existentially terrifying assumption that when we die, there is nothing waiting for us on the other side. What if there is no light at the end of the tunnel? No pearly gates? Just nothing forever? But what if someone or some mysterious group of persons already knew the answer to what happened after the end of all human life? And what if the answer was so much more horrifying than we ever could have imagined? So much so that this shadowy cabal had already tried to prevent the fate awaiting all of us after we die. Be warned. We're about to delve into the unsettling tale of something known as Project Dammerung and its connection to something known as SCP-3448, as the Foundation categorizes it. It is a story about our fear of what comes next, beyond this mortal coil. This is the catalyst for the Foundation uncovering the most horrific secret in human history, a truth that should have stayed buried. Warning, we are about to unravel the beginning of the end. The end of what, you might be asking? Why, the end of death itself, of course. Any outsider looking in might think we're being a little bit overdramatic here, but we'll forgive you for that mistake. You can have that one on us. At first glance to the untrained eye and uninformed individual, SCP-3448 might just seem like little more than a magnetic resonance imaging machine. Chances are you've seen these big machines in medical dramas, or maybe you've even been placed inside one during a stay at the hospital. Using powerful magnets, an MRI machine aligns all the protons in your body. Then the machine generates a pulse of radio frequency current to create a detailed image of the inside of a patient's body. Basically, to put it in extremely oversimplified terms, it's a big camera for looking at your internal organs. Now, don't forget to smile, really show off that pancreas. It looks great at this angle. Of course, when dealing with anomalies encountered by the SCP Foundation, few things are ever really exactly as they first seem. And in that very same vein, SCP-3448 is far more than just a harmless piece of medical apparatus. Look beyond the main bulk of the MRI machine, and you'll start to notice that a few unique modifications have been made to the device. For one, the winding mass of jumper cables connecting the machine to its rudimentary upgrades, namely the same type of technology used in particle accelerators, along with a whole collection of custom circuit boards. For another, although you wouldn't know just from looking at SCP-3448, the contraption has also been through a number of anomalous rituals, seemingly combining the technological with the occult and spiritual. But the question remains, why? What is this thing for exactly? To put it simply, it's a hotline to the great beyond. SCP-3448 is a means of communication with the world of the dead themselves. Now, we might be oversimplifying things yet again there, so let's take it from the top. Project Dammerung was the name given to those who developed SCP-3448. That designation doesn't just refer to the modified MRI machine itself, but also the communication that said device was capable of after the Project Dammerung team had finished their tinkering with it. You see, nobody knows what happens to us after we die, because no one has ever been able to experience being dead in the real world and existing in the afterlife at the same time. But with SCP-3448, that problem just simply isn't an issue anymore. Still with us so far? Okay, here's how the machine actually works. A living human is placed inside, just like those ordinary MRI machines at your local hospital. However, the difference here is that the extra anomalous components of SCP-3448, the rituals, the particle acceleration, and so on, allow this person to enter a unique state of being halfway between life and death. Their bodily functions are halted, brought to a stop by the machine. However, they are still able to retain their consciousness and the awareness that this allows for. Not quite dead, but not quite alive either. Sort of an unalive state, or a half-death, if you prefer, or perhaps afterlife. Now, while a person is in this half-death, they will have entered a conceptual state of being. This is referred to as SCP-3448-A, an existence of pure consciousness while physical form, in this case the person's body, exists separately in the real world. The body, now called SCP-3448-1, no longer houses a subject's consciousness, their essence, not just their mind, but their thoughts and personality. If it helps to think of it in theological terms, you could even think of it as their soul. But while the machine's function is all very impressive and interesting, what's the actual point to it? Why spend so much time trying to create a controlled separation of consciousness from a dead body? What's Project Dammerung for? Well, that's easy. SCP-3448 is the primary tool intended to complete the sole objective of Project Dammerung, a mission to capture a dangerous cognitohazard, namely, death itself. To be clear, when we say death, we don't mean the Grim Reaper, that skull-faced, scythe-wielding embodiment of oblivion. Chances are you can probably catch him just by going out on Halloween with a big net. But Project Dammerung's goal was to contain the actual process of death, the very concept that takes a living, conscious entity and makes it the opposite. You see, when a living subject is placed in SCP-3448 and their consciousness leaves their brain, it leaves behind some kind of anomalous electrical energy signature. As you may already know if you can remember back to high school biology class, the brain uses electrical impulses to send signals all over the body, allowing your organs to function, your limbs to move, and your muscles to contract or relax. What's strange is, this electrical activity seems to continue within the brain of someone whose consciousness has been separated from their body by SCP-3448. Studying these signals, the SCP Foundation personnel working on Project Dammerung have inferred that these are residual signals, replicating how the brain would react if the subject introduced into the half-dead SCP-3448-1 state as if they were still alive, even though they have to be dead in order to access that state in the first place. And now your brain is probably such a mess of electrical signals trying to keep up with all of that you might have actually completely missed the part where we told you that Project Dammerung is actually a Foundation-backed project. Okay, let's have a speedy recap. So far, we have an anomalously modified MRI machine capable of splitting the consciousness, or soul, of a person after rendering them clinically dead. On top of that, the Foundation themselves sanctioned the project that created this device in an effort to capture and contain death itself. But how did this come about? Who among the SCP Foundation would want to contain death so much to commission an entire project dedicated to that goal? Well, who do we all know sitting above the entire Foundation, overseeing everything, infamous for all having some anomalous form of immortality, and would stand to gain from Project Dammerung? That's right, the World Championship Death Dodgers, the O5 Council. You see, in order to more fully understand why Project Dammerung was established and why they built SCP-3448, we need to explain a little bit about a different anomaly, SCP-6718. We have another video on this channel that goes into more detail about that, but to put it in a nutshell, SCP-2718 is the horrible truth about what happens to us after we die. The O5 Council first learned of it when one of their own, O5-11, full name Roger Sheldon, died of a stroke. O5-11 was the only council member to have refused to accept any of the anomalous treatments or enhancements that prevented the other O5s from dying. However, the council chose to resurrect him. Upon his return to the land of the living, Roger Sheldon told the other overseers what he had learned about the nature of the afterlife, what lies beyond this fleeting mortal coil, waiting for us after we die. Roger had experienced firsthand that the dead actually remain conscious after their bodies have shut down all other functions. That meant that everyone, Every person to have died over the course of human history has remained aware of everything that happened to them afterward. They can feel themselves slowly decaying, their bones and skin withering, buried under the cold, wasting away into nothingness day after day. And that's SCP-6718, the painful truth that there is no paradise, no heaven, no afterlife. There is just endless, silent consciousness beyond the end of every life. This revelation is what instigated the Overseer Council, specifically O5-4, to establish Project Dammerung. It was learning the answer to what happens next that spurred the creation of SCP-3448. The intention was, by reading and interacting with those residual electrical signals in the brain, that the Foundation could create a link, a form of two-way communication between them and the living world and the subject, SCP-3448-A, in their half-dead state. Using other items and anomalous technology connected to the MRI machine, the Foundation's researchers could interpret the electrical signals in SCP-3448-A's brain as images. A Foundation agent by the name of Anthony Michaels proved to be the only test subject capable of using SCP-3448, beyond the earliest tests on animal specimens. And we know what you're thinking. The Foundation would normally use D-Class personnel for this sort of test. After all, it's a machine that renders you almost dead, stopping all bodily function. The problem was, Project Dammerung needed someone loyal to the Foundation, and D-Classes could hardly be trusted to follow orders without the threat of death. Think about it. You separate their consciousness from their body, and they don't care if you threaten to kill them. Agent Michaels served as the SCP-3448-A component, residing within the modified MRI machine, held in a state between life and death. But something went wrong. Something that would ultimately do more harm than good. The Foundation had tried in vain to contain death, and in tampering with forces well beyond their own understanding, may have accidentally done something even worse. They neutralized it. They killed death, and things only went downhill from there.
Researcher Martin pushed the deck against the door, hoping it would hold long enough for him to find an alternate escape route. He wasn't thinking about the long term. He couldn't afford to. With the Foundation's global reach, he'd never truly escape them, never be able to make it away, condemned to spend the rest of his life on the run from the organization he'd devoted his life to. It was too overwhelming to even attempt to reckon with that, especially with the pounding of a fist against the door. He scrabbled around, opening windows to try and see if there was a safe way down. Technically, none of this was his fault, at least in his mind. The administrative login information he'd used to access the file shouldn't have been left so easy to find. That was just poor cybersecurity on the Foundation's part. Researcher Martin had been tasked with compiling information on SCP-001, one of the most infamous anomalies ever encountered in the Foundation's long and storied history, or multiple of them at least. What Martin had come to learn was there were numerous entities within the Foundation's files that all acted as proposals for SCP-001. Some were creatures, the typical kind of anomalous entities the Foundation dealt with on a regular basis, but some of the proposals focused on more abstract anomalies, and somehow, those were more existentially terrifying than any evil godlike being bent on destroying reality. Theories about the very source of anomalies themselves, that their very existence might have been predetermined by some otherworldly force. Then there were the other proposals that named parts of the Foundation as the true SCP-001. Those seemed to suck Researcher Martin in like a vortex, dragging him down a deep, dark rabbit hole that made him start to question everything he thought he knew about working for the SCP Foundation, and the one that had toppled him into a full-blown conspiracy-obsessed stupor that there was no coming back from, the Noir Box proposal. The weighted head of a battering ram splintered the wooden surface of the door, spraying fragments over the room. The table propped up to keep it shut toppled under the force of the entry as a squad of shadowy figures in full black combat gear rushed inside. The mobile task force surrounded the cowering researcher, keeping their weapons trained on him.
Researcher Martin, pleading for his life, started gesturing to the walls of the room around him that had been plastered with hastily scrawled diagrams and equations. Martin tried desperately to find some concise, easy-to-understand way of explaining to the soldiers what he'd uncovered. They only picked up on a few words like many worlds hypothesis and splitting universes, but ultimately they didn't follow what he was saying and weren't sent there to hear him out. All the MTF had been told was that researcher Martin had breached Foundation security and now posed a risk of exposing sensitive information about SCP-001. There was only one path of recourse: termination. However, unbeknownst to them, Dr. Martin was fine. At least a version of him was. One who never learned about the Noir Box proposal for SCP-001 and hadn't gone mad trying to unravel its mysteries. Instead, he was a respected higher-ranking member of the Foundation who was alive and well, in a completely different timeline. The formation of the SCP Foundation has always been shrouded in mystery, with nobody really knowing what the true origin of the organization is, and what is merely just a cover story left in the archives to keep the truth hidden. SCP-001, the Noir Box proposal at least, might hold the answers to the questions surrounding how the Foundation came to be. 3 times over. Known as the Tindalo's Trinity, the file pertaining to this anomaly is buried deep in the SCP Foundation's database, under layers upon layers of encryption and security clearance requirements. It requires someone at the very top level of the Foundation to access, a member of either the Overseer Council or the Foundation's High Command, or Overwatch. But wait, what are those? Aren't they the same thing? Well, yes and no. The exact name of the high-ranking secretive group that runs the Foundation has often been interchangeable, whether they're known as the O5 Council, the Overseer Council, etc. But what if it wasn't just many different names for the same governing body, but actually separate names for alternate versions of the ones who control the SCP Foundation? Allow us to explain. All 3 of these groups, the Overseer Council, High Command, and Overwatch, have come to a consensus that SCP-001 is an anomaly that connects with the Foundation's very origin. They believe that the founder of the SCP Foundation, also known as SCP-001, was anomalous in some way that caused them to interact with time in an unusual fashion. The triumvirate of councils are in agreement that around the time that the SCP Foundation was formed, 3 distinct timelines were generated, given the anomalous nature of the organization's founder. Each of these timelines drastically altered the nature of SCP-001, featuring a different version in each one. In the first, commonly known as Timeline HC, where the Foundation is run by a High Command, SCP-001 was an anomalous human corpse. This timeline's SCP-001 still exhibited all the behavioral characteristics of a normal human being, but could additionally replicate itself at an erratic, uncontrollable rate, usually when performing tasks that could have multiple possible outcomes. SCP-001 in Timeline HC also interacted anachronistically with its environment, passing through solid matter that predated it or would outlast it. So it had to be contained in a room that was constructed before it existed as an anomaly. This timeline's SCP-001 was responsible for conceiving the idea for the SCP Foundation, and was able to promote a significant interest in the organization. However, they were assassinated before the Foundation was officially codified, with the culprits being a version of Mobile Task Force ALP-0, who are believed to have originated from either of the other 2 timelines. While this seems to have been done to deter the Foundation forming in this timeline, it seems to have had the opposite effect. Despite the assassination of SCP-001 occurring before the official formation of the SCP Foundation in Timeline HC, this version of the Foundation was successfully codified by the 13 members of what they referred to as High Command. Given the anomalous circumstances around the death of SCP-001, it provided a catalyst for the organization to immediately establish itself as this timeline's protection against the threat posed by anomalous entities. The body of SCP-001 was placed in the building that had been its childhood home, securing it somewhere that predated them to negate their anomalous properties. This made them the first anomaly contained by Timeline HC's version of the SCP Foundation, posthumously garnering them the official designation of SCP-001. So that's the first of our 3 timelines at play. The events that unfold in the second are considerably different. In this timeline, Timeline OC, the Foundation was initially created by a different SCP-001. This entity, referred to primarily as the Founder, appropriately enough, was a human being known to possess anomalous temporal abilities. The Founder was known to also be immortal, showing no visible signs of aging, and with a resistance to external damage that prevented him from being directly killed. Any injuries he sustained could be healed, but only at the same rate typical of an average human being. The temporal side of his anomalous properties pertained to predicting the future. The Founder was able to, with an inarguable level of precision and accuracy, forecast events before they occurred. His foresight, it appeared to the Foundation, was not inciting these events to happen as he predicted them. However, everything he ever predicted would occur became an inevitability, impossible to delay, avert, or alter through any means. During the events of Timeline OC, and as his preferred nickname implies, the Founder was the sole figure responsible for establishing this version of the SCP Foundation. In this course of events, the O5 Council of this timeline were known as the Overseer Council. It was, however, while he was in the process of establishing the organization that things started to go awry. Whether he was able to predict this occurrence or not is unknown, although it seems to have corresponded with the MTF-ALP-0 assassination of SCP-001 in the other timeline, Timeline HC. In Timeline OC, at the same time as the assassination in Timeline HC, the Founder began to exhibit his anomalous temporal properties in front of the original members of Overseer Council. However, it should also be noted that there was no recorded presence of MTF-ALP-0 in Timeline OC. Believing the Founder to be a potential danger to the Foundation they had all helped to create, the founding Overseer Council classified him as an anomalous threat. They immediately devised a set of containment measures for the Founder, now designating him as SCP-001, the first anomaly contained by this timeline's version of the Foundation. He was placed within a standard humanoid containment cell and given regular meals, while personnel were forbidden to communicate with him. Given his role in establishing the Foundation in this version of events, SCP-001 is, naturally, in favor of containing and analyzing anomalies. However, not when that includes him, and insisted that he be released. According to one of his predictions for forthcoming events, he requested to be allowed to build a device, but refused to elaborate on the intended purpose of it. SCP-001 even refused to allow other members of Foundation personnel to construct the device on his behalf for testing purposes. The third of these timelines is referred to as Timeline OW, wherein the leading body of the Foundation are known as Overwatch. Here, just like the previous iterations of its history, the description of SCP-001 and their role in forming the SCP Foundation differs. In this timeline, SCP-001 is an anomaly that consists of 2 distinct parts. The first of these is a figure not dissimilar from the Founder. Referred to as SCP-001-1, this person is also a functionally immortal human, who doesn't age and can't heal rapidly from damage. SCP-001-1 also advocates for securing and analyzing anomalies. However, this includes himself, as he doesn't object to his own containment, or that of the second component of this SCP-001. Known as SCP-001-A, this device is capable of accurately calculating any and all possible outcomes of any event that is input into it. Unlike the Founder, who seemed to possess a foresight able to predict the only inevitable outcome of the future, SCP-001-A is able to account for the possibility of multiple potential futures, even down to accounting for how its own predictions could potentially influence or alter outcomes. In layman's terms, at least one of the eventualities predicted by SCP-001-A will always be accurate, unless the predictions are to do with its own future, or the future of SCP-001-1. In this instance, the device will always produce one of 2 assumptions that are incorrect. Either that SCP-001-1 was killed after an assassination attempt and never constructed SCP-001-A, but that's impossible after all. SCP-001-A exists. It's already been made in this timeline. The other incorrect prediction it can give is that SCP-001-1 also exhibits the same anomalous properties as the prediction machine. more akin to the founder, and that SCP-001-A was never constructed in the first place. But again, that can't be right, in this timeline anyway. According to records within Timeline OW, their version of the Founder, who is of course SCP-001-1, encountered a version of Mobile Task Force ALP-0 from one of the other timelines. They presented the Founder of the OW timeline with detailed blueprints for the construction of SCP-001-A. The device's completion coincided with the assassination in Timeline HC, and the corresponding anomalous incident in Timeline OC. After this point, MTF-ALP-0 departs from Timeline OW. This version of the SCP Foundation is then created to study the device, SCP-001-A, with this founder and a group of his close friends, who would become this Foundation's Overwatch. Following this initial research group's discovery of other anomalous phenomenon that threatened the rest of society, the team's goal expanded to research anomalies and protect the world from the danger they posed. However, the rest of the Overwatch began to age at a natural rate. While the founder didn't recognize this, he volunteered to be contained and studied, thus becoming a component of this timeline's SCP-001. Stepping back and looking at all of these timelines, there seems to be a number of marked similarities, particularly relating to how the Foundation was established and how a figure, usually the one who founded the organization, possessed anomalous means of interacting with time and temporality. Under normal circumstances, interaction between alternate timelines should be impossible. But the preservation of information about all three on the SCP Foundation's database has somehow enabled all three timelines to communicate with each other. Through exchanging intelligence via their own versions of the database, all three iterations of the Foundation across the three timelines have learned that almost all of the anomalies they have encountered since being established are exclusive to their own timeline. There are a total of 17 anomalies that have been confirmed to exist across the three timelines. But there is a concerning factor in all this: the presence of an anachronistic military group referring to itself as MTF-ALP-0. This Mobile Task Force's direct involvement in the events of both Timeline HC, where they assassinated SCP-001, and Timeline OW, where they provided schematics for SCP-001-A, raises an awful lot of questions. This MTF had to be acting on orders of the Foundation, but which version in which timeline? The consensus among the leading committees of all three, the High Command, Overseer Council, and Overwatch, is that at some unknown date in the future, each of them will inevitably send their own version of MTF-ALP-0 back in time to alter the Foundation's past. And in a sense, they've already done it, and seen how this altered the circumstances in order to inadvertently create the Foundation. But this poses the risk of one of these timelines overriding another, thus meaning all information garnered by alternate iterations of the Foundation could be lost. So, putting their heads together, these Foundation leading committees come to the conclusion that they need to attempt to merge all three timelines. And it seems the way to do so is using the device that Timeline OC's founder wanted to build, and that Timeline OW's founder was able to construct. This device is how this proposal for SCP-001 was given its nickname, the Noir Box. The intention of the Noir Box is to shunt all three timelines into a stable joint path, like turning loose strands into a single length of twine. As such, the leading committees of all three different timelines have agreed to share their intel on how each of them can safely create their own Noir Boxes, and all three will be used to merge the timelines. Every member of High Command, the Overseer Council, and Overwatch sign off on it, but whether or not the plan works is another matter. The fabric of time is delicate, and one wrong move could tear everything apart. What the heck is consensus reality? And is it really the answer to everything? You may have seen us mention the subject before. Consensus reality, after all, is what the SCP Foundation is trying to preserve in the face of ever-increasing anomalous activity. A kind of truth or normalcy that all of us can agree on. Pick 10 people at random and ask them, what color is the sky? What gaseous element is produced by trees? Has every US president since Washington secretly been an alien reptile in disguise? The answer will, or at least should, be blue, oxygen, and no. This is consensus reality. But no, not really. Yes, in a more casual sense, the state of reality to which we all agree could be a viable definition of the term consensus reality. But you likely don't remember being called upon for a vote along with the rest of humanity on what is and isn't quote-unquote normal. That's because consensus reality isn't the consensus of everyone. It's the consensus of the most powerful beings alive, the O5 Council. In this instance, SCP-001 is the ever-updating document that records exactly what normal is. But perhaps even more important is that anything that exists outside the Council's most recent definition of normal is targeted for containment. While at face value it seems less flashy than something like the Gate Guardian or the terrifying Scarlet King, or the insane twists and turns of the Ouroboros cycle, the document defining consensus reality, despite being the only thing on the database to be given the classification non-anomalous, is about as foundational as Foundation documents get. Literally everything currently in containment is there because this document deems it so. It is the SCP Foundation's 10 Commandments of Containment, and thou shalt contain. If this document was ever leaked, it could lead to a complete broken masquerade scenario, where the anomalous cat is let fully out of the bag. Only the O5 Council has access to the document, and it's only through consensus that additions, alterations, or removals can be made. Naturally, it's a document that's in extremely high demand among the anomalous community, because it answers the big question that every anomalous individual has. If I'm not even dangerous, if I've committed no crime that would necessitate the locking up of a non-anomalous human, why am I still being contained? And don't worry, today we're going to answer that question, or rather, the O5 Council will. But let's return to the Council themselves. We've covered them and their many interpretations before, from them being a group of fantastical, immortal demigods to being a frightening hive mind, to being a shadowy faction of mysterious, emotionless bureaucrats, constantly conniving and undermining each other to gain just that little bit more power. But what's more frightening? The keys to normality being in the hands of these larger-than-life fantastical figures, or in the hands of human beings, just as valuable and afraid as the rest of us, with only the knowledge of the strange things going on behind the curtain to protect them from the truly unknowable. The O5 Council holds meetings with some regularity where they ask themselves and each other whether any new developments in the wider world require changes to the new normal. It is up to the O5 Council to define the difference between universal laws, gravitation, physical forces, and basic chemistry, biology, sociology, psychology, technology, and philosophy, and the kind of crackpot theories being spouted by people on street corners carrying "the end is nigh" signs. Some of their decisions are quite simple. Can a new development be explained by the laws of an existing non-anomalous framework? If so, the rules need not be changed. The current paradigm of our understanding can rest neatly in place, but other decisions fall into a gray area. In order to illustrate this, we're going to do something unprecedented. We're going to go into the actual boardroom of the O5 Council and see exactly what decisions they made about our consensus reality, the one that you and I are living in right now. We're going to look at 3 different meetings, one from 1932, another from 1945, and an example from as recently as 2014. So what really goes on in the discussions that define what we all would consider normal? The 1932 discussion was spurred on by strange development happening in the United Kingdom. New forms of occult-adjacent witchcraft and spiritualism were beginning to take off, descended largely from traditional pagan and Wicca beliefs. The fact that some of these believers were actually attempting spells was enough to catch the Foundation's all-seeing eye, and the matter was discussed by the O5 Council. O5-3 said, "Why are we even covering this? There are traditional beliefs in cultures throughout history that we do not consider anomalous. We must not use our position to threaten the right of humanity to believe." With a stern look, O5-7 replied, "Except this does not extend from traditional practices. This new witchcraft is a modern invention, developed through a scholarly rereading of practices as an alternative to Christianity. It is not a continuation, and practitioners are attempting spellcasting." O5-5 chimed in with, "Soon you'll say Aleister Crowley has something to do with it. The document is clear. Theurgy is anomalous. Religion and spirituality are not. Show me proof that they are casting spells that cannot be explained under rigorous testing, and I will personally see to containing those spells myself. Until then, no. Just as Thelema is allowed, so shall this witchcraft. For God's sake, we'll allow Satanism as long as they aren't channeling demonic energies. 05-1, the most senior member of the council, nodded and said, "Agreed. Furthermore, we will need all the faith we can muster against the Theurgic traditions. We never know when a new faith will assist in our cause." No updates to consensus reality were made. In 1945, an event of far greater magnitude took place. The use of terrifying new weapons by the US military in Hiroshima and Nagasaki that resulted in the deaths of over 200,000 people. The council converged to discuss the earth-shattering event and what their reaction to it should be. Shaking, 05-2 said, "Thank you for responding to my emergency call. Trinity has happened. I can barely contain what I saw. It was like the sun rising from the desert sand, a dawn of destruction and fire that lasted for miles around. I cannot believe that such an explosion could ever be seen as possible. Tales and prior evidence of the summoning of gods have had less impact. I tremble with fear about the possibility of people wielding this kind of power, the ability to level a city with the flick of a switch." 05-4 replied, "Weren't the Germans and Russians also developing this technology? We are at war, and this sort of escalation happens." 05-5 said, "May I remind my esteemed colleagues that we are not at war? The United States, Japan, they are at war. We are not nations. No, the question stands, is this anomalous? Do the physical effects follow from the mathematical concepts?" 05-7 said, They do follow. Scientific testing was completed each and every step of the way to reach this point. I do not believe this is anomalous, no matter how frightening the repercussions are." 05-2, still understandably worked up, said, "What, you're just going to let people hold on to the keys to their own destruction? We have fought tooth and nail to keep such capabilities out of the reach of man, and now you're saying we should abandon our purpose?" 05-5 said, "We do not prevent destruction. We sequester the anomalous. And as long as we agree that the test was arrived through diligent scientific process available to anyone..." But 05-2 simply wasn't having it. He shot back, "Available to anyone? Listen to yourself, man! Can you imagine a future where any 2-bit dictator chooses to unleash the fire of 1,000 suns wherever he wishes? Maybe the problem isn't with the equations. Maybe the whole of nuclear physics is anomalous itself." 05-1 once again brought his own level-headed perspective to the table. "Enrico Fermi has already received a Nobel Prize for his work on transuranic elements and radioactivity. We can't just secure nuclear physics from the world. Radioactivity is everywhere, and we end up causing more contradictions when we try to send ourselves back to the Dark Ages. Try explaining chemistry without referring to covalent bonds. Try explaining biology. Nuclear physics is here to stay, and we had better get used to the consequences of this, no matter how terrifying this will be for the planet and for humanity." With a rattling sigh, 05-2 once again took a seat, murmuring, "May God have mercy on our souls." In the aftermath of this debate, the document on consensus reality was altered to reflect these new developments in nuclear physics, as frightening as they were. I think we can all form a consensus on the fact that one-off murder is a less depressing subject than mass murder, and it was a single murder that led to the 05 Council discussing the concept of worms that walk in 2014. 05-6 came to the table with, "For those unfamiliar with the topic, the worm that walks is a trope in which a character is actually a writhing hive mind of worms generally held together as a single mass. We're not here to discuss this trope. Instead, we are here to discuss the recent conspiracy that has arisen from it. The conspiracy is the idea that certain individuals are actually worms that walk, and not humans." When asked if this conspiracy had any merit to it, 05-6 replied, "No, individual conspiracy believers are divided themselves on who is a worm that walks and who isn't. And all evidence indicates that there aren't actual worms that walk in the general populace. It pretty clearly falls under irreproducible conspiracy theories. I personally believe there's nothing we need to do or change in SCP-001. Another member of the council wasn't so sure that these results were irreproducible, saying, "On December 11th, 2013, a believer in the conspiracy from Decatur, Alabama killed his neighbor under the belief that the neighbor was a worm that walks. The killer then took a video of his deceased neighbor and uploaded it to YouTube. claiming it was proof of the conspiracy and that the corpse was dissolving into individual worms before his very eyes. He said that he was going to take a sample. The video was quickly blocked and removed, and everyone who has viewed the video agrees that the subject is unmoving and does not dissolve into worms. The killer turned himself into police while clutching a jar of Tubifex worms, and the neighbor sent to the Morgan County morgue. Autopsy confirmed that the decedent was missing a thumb post-mortem and killed by a gunshot to the chest, which, if he were a worm that walks, would be survivable. When questioned whether these were just the actions of a single insane man, the council member continued, "The one item of interest was that after the autopsy, the assistant coroner oversaw the return of the body to the next of kin. The assistant coroner was also a conspiracy believer, and despite not having any prior contact to the parties involved, screamed in disgust upon entering the examination room, grabbing a mop and complaining about all the worms everywhere. No one else noticed any signs of worm infestation." It was further discussed that D-classes who were shown the body didn't see it as anything other than a corpse. However, after being told about the worm that walks trope, several of them saw it as a writhing mass of worms. Some believe that this could be a mimetic side effect of actually encountering a living worm that walks. And updates were made to the document to reference the possible existence of perceptual monastic worm triggers. So now you know what the O5 Council is up to when not playing office golf or plotting each other's downfalls. They're having discussions about witchcraft, war crimes, and walking worms. You're probably feeling a pang of curiosity about the actual SCP-001 document, especially if you're an understandably vindictive, anomalous individual wondering why the Foundation is carting you off to paranormal Gitmo for the simple crime of existing. And if you look for the true document and you manage to survive the mimetic kill agents put in place to stop you, then what you'll actually find is even stranger. A letter to you from O5-5 explaining exactly what's happening to you. The letter reads, "Hello, I'm afraid you won't find SCP-001 here. It's stored in a far more unreachable location than this. I'm sure you were hoping you could get in, edit it in a couple of places here and there, and voila, you're no longer anomalous. You're free to go. The Foundation will harass you no longer. Of course, it can't be that easy, but I'm going to help you. You deserve this much. I'm going to tell you why. Why the Foundation targets you. Why we deem you something to contain, to persecute. After all, there are far worse evils in the world. We keep our record of nuclear weapons above as an example. There are numerous genocides throughout history. The death toll from just the flu alone is far greater than the potential damage for thousands of the people and objects we contain. And yet we dedicate ourselves to branding you anomalous. Something not normal. Something inherently wrong. Something that cannot be allowed its peace. Why? I'm not going to patronize you and say there's nothing I can do. I'm only one voice on the council, and I can't change things on my own, that's true. But the decisions I make, and the way I let myself view your circumstance are a direct cause of people seeing fit to throw you into a box. Even if I can't change the document, I could remain one more advocate for your normalcy. After all, humanity has believed in ghosts and spirits for thousands of years. We all believe in the monster under our beds when we were children. These phenomena are very real, and very much a part of the way the world works. Why can't we just declare them normal? Why won't I free you from your torment? It's because we aren't only here to secure, contain, and protect the world. We're here to secure, contain, and protect you. The defining feature of the anomalous is that it cannot be explained through simple scientific testing. This makes you and your nature different, unique even. And that scarcity makes it valuable. But that doesn't mean that your value is something everyone can appreciate. Sometimes it can only be appreciated by those who would use it against you. The scarcity is also the tool by which a monster can exploit you. Others aren't familiar with your anomaly and won't respond to descriptions about it as real. This gives opportunity to nefarious individuals to exploit the lack of knowledge and use you as an eldritch pawn to their pleasure. They can isolate you, consume you, make your anomaly their lever to destroy, slake a sadistic thirst with your existence. I'm sure you've seen it happen. Someone is different. Their desires, needs, their reality forces them to be ostracized by the world at large. They're left alone, probably not friendless, but sidelined, starved for connection. That's when someone swoops in, promising greatness, but only offering that connection you crave through consumption of you, destruction of your world, perversion of your reality. You fight back, try to tell someone of your plight, but others respond, "Oh, that can't be happening, that's not real. You must be mistaken." You are alone in your anomaly and left to suffer. We can't let that happen. Yes, go ahead, point out that we're isolating you at least as well, slowly consuming you and your existence just as surely as some abuser might wish to burn you up. Call us monsters. It's okay. But keep in mind that even in our pursuit of you, our cover-up, our incarceration of you, we still want to make sure that you continue to exist, that you aren't removed entirely from this world. You have every right to exist. You have every right to be as different as you are. You, the monsters out there, the monsters in here, you are all just as real as we are. Just as real as the teeming, irrational, self-destructive humanity that remains ignorant to your plight. And the conclusion that we are all, in the end, the same stuff. I hope you can find comfort in it. Yes, you are a monster. But whether we are deemed anomalous or not, so is every last one of us. And that means you deserve your existence. We secure you. We contain you. We protect you. And even if you still don't get why I'm doing this, please understand that I still love you.
What is your favorite word? Think about it for a moment. Think real hard. Write it down in the comments, posted for everyone else to see. How many letters does it have? How many syllables? Say it aloud. How does it sound? How does it feel on your tongue? Really, really think about it. Now make sure you keep that word in mind. It's important, and we'll come back to it later. For now, it's time to talk about SCP-6449. Look, there's really nothing any special about this one. It wasn't even important enough to be mentioned with the other info hazards. It's not an evil talking toaster, that's for sure. SCP-3449 appears to just be a standard spiral notebook. Notebook? It's supposed to be notebook, right? Anyway, it's just a standard spiral notebook with a dark blue cover. It's safe class, and it's stored in the standard containment locker in Site-19. There aren't any other containment requires, but testing is currently underway to determine, I think it's meant to be determine, long-term containment requirements. This is a mess. Anyway, this item and its anomalous power is actually considered so inconsequential that researchers have explored the possibility of putting it on the anomalous items log, a place where items too useless to warrant a full file ends up. Jeez, how do you misspell up that badly? It's 2 letters. Well, it's supposed to be 2 letters. How did you work Z into that? They aren't even close to each other on keyboard. Man. Anyway, the notebook contains mostly blank pages. Some are torn and only 6 contain actual writing. But due to the formatting of the writing, the text, consisting mainly of diary entries, is almost unreadable. This is due to syntactical errors, random capitalization, and rampant misspellings? Great, you misspelled misspellings. How cute. Apparently, all attempts to correct these misspellings fail, or even lead to additional misspellings. This anomalous effect extends to anyone attempting to write... Yep, that was spelled R-I-G-H-T. Anyone attempting to write about SCP-3449, including the script for this video, apparently. There are no further notable anomalous properties. Tests are ongoing, though those with any inquiries about testing SCP-3449 should contact lead researcher Nicolo Gurdnell. The notebook, which was misspelled even worse this time, impressive, was first recovered by MTF Epsilon 6, also known as the Village Idiots, after a series of info-hazardous and cognitohazardous phenomenon were discovered in the Pittsburgh metro area. The source seemed to be a storage unit filled with anomalous items, and SCP-3449 was amogus. I think that's meant to be among them. The storage unit was registered to a man by the name of Edward Selsborough, currently designated as Porpoise of Interest 4335. Whew, that's the end of that. Thanks for watching the video, folks. Now go check out... Oh, wait, there's more. Phenomenal. Let's keep going. Apparently, that version of the file was an older one. Let's check the next one and see if that's any more useful. Oh my. It appears that the updates here are actually quite extensive. Okay, let's give this another try. SCP-3449 is a Euclid-class SPC kept in the humanid containment cells of Site-19. Items affected by it are kept in standard storage lockers for safe-class anomalous objects at the same site. The primary reason for this shift is that SCP-3449 has changed its object of designation. It is no longer the Spiral Notebook. It is now a 34-year-old Caucasian man known as Edward Selsborough, formerly known as Person of Interest 4335. He is believed to be the creator of the Notebook, as well as other objects found in the storage looker in Pittsburgh. Foundation personnel are now trying to locate and contain any other objects created by Mr. Selsborough, though success has been limited on this front. That was cute. SCP-3449's analogous abilities manifest onto both Edward himself and all the objects created by him. Reading about him or any of these objects will result in syntactical errors, arbitrary capitalizations, and rampart spellings. Attempts to revise or correct the writing will either fail to remove the errors or create new errors. It appears that the anomalous effects of SCP-3449 proper are more severe than that of the ones caused by his anomalous objects. MTF-6, also known as the Village Idiots, apprehended SCP-3449 in his apartment just outside of Pittsburgh. He appeared to be in an advanced state of disorientation and dehydration. Records collected by the Mobile Task Force found that Mr. Selsborough had not left his apartment in over 10 days, which would account for his dire health conditions. Selsborough did not communicate with members of the Mobile Task Force, but did not reset arrest and subsequent containment either. Okay, these spellings are rough, but I'm going to try and power through. I am a professional, and we're almost there. The following is the full log of items obtained from SCP-3449's storage locker that also exhibit his anomalous effects. The notebook, as already discussed, the pages are either blank, torn, or illegible. Selsborough's computer. Files saved on this device include spreadsheets dealing personal finances, ideals for products, and an unfinished horror novel that is almost unreadable due to the poor quality of its writing. Grocery list had only 2 written items. Booter was spelled with only 1 T, and medication, which was spelled medication. A planner. Last entry was dated 2 weeks before containment and believed to contain reminders to perform various chores. However, a mixture of poor handwriting and word choice allows for other interpretations. And finally, Mr. Selsborough's cell phone. Foundation researchers were also able to collect the call logs in hopes of further tracking Selsborough's pre-containment activities. The last 3 calls, which were all made on the same day 2 weeks before containment, dialed different numbers, only one of which was in use. The Foundation made contact with the receiver of said call, who had no knowledge of SCP-3449, and claimed that they did not answer the call. Lead researcher Nicolo Gurdinel conducted the first interview with SCP-3449 shortly after his capture. When he entered the interview chamber, he found that SCP-3449 was just sitting in the corner, with his head in his hands, rocking back and forth in what appeared to be apparent distress. He then began looking down into his lap and twiddling his thumbs like a child. Nicolo engaged him in a calm and polite tone, addressing him as SCP-3449. The anomaly made eye contact with Dr. Gurdinel, but he didn't respond, and instead continued staring at him. As Gurdinel asked further questions, Selsborough simply didn't answer, or would, at the very most, acknowledge the questions with simple gestures. Gurdinel asked whether Selsborough was making products for his business, to which he smiled and shook his head. Gurdinel then asked Selsborough whether he could speak or not, or if it was merely a choose on his part. Unsurprisingly, Selsborough offered no explanation, and the interview came to a close shortly afterwards. Tests are still ongoing to find out if Selsborough's inability to speak or communicate come as a result of his anomalous traits, or if this is simply a result of apophonia, a uncommon but non-anomalous condition that renders its victims unable to speak. Tests have confirmed that Selsborough does have all the organs required for vocalization, but appears to not use them. Further tests are required. Alright, there we have it. That was a complete nightmare to read thanks to SCP-3449's anomalous effects, but at least it's over now. Now, go check out... Wait, there's more. Another update to the file. Good, okay. Alright, let's go take a look. Oh, I see. This is a lot more dangerous than I thought. I suppose I better read on. SCP-3449 has been upgraded to Keter Class Anomal. SCP-3449-A, the new designation for Edward Salzberger, is to be kept in a high-security hazmat containment in Site-19. The inanimate anomalous possessions of Edward Salzberg are to be kept in standard object containment. Any reports written on SCP-3449 must be rotten by Bobble who have been exposed to it for less than 7 days in order to keep the files rateable. To prevent this infectious info-hazard from spread further, the number of people allowed to interact with this anomaly is kept relatively small and consists of those that have already been exposed at some point or another. This includes O5-8, MTF-6, Dr. Teller's research team, some additional personnel selected for XPC-3449 research, and personnel chosen to update SCP-3449 documentation. Some additional personnel selected for XPC-3449 research and personnel chosen to update SCP-3449 documentation. While Edward Salzberg and his personal effects are chronically locked up, SCP-3449 is not currently considered contained. Research into the spread of SCP-3449's effects, the vectors for transmission, and any potential remedies for its degenerative effects are now top priority for all involved before this whole thing gets out of hand. Further research has taught the Foundation that not only are Salzberg and his items powerful info hazards, their anomalous effects appear to be able to infect these who experience them permanently. Initially, it will appear that writing quality only degrades when the subject is actually writing about SCP-3449 itself, but over time they'll come to the frightening realization that it actually affects their writhing as a whole. The effect also progresses in its severity over time, eventually rendering the victim's ability to write legible sentences completely destroyed. The initial anomalous effects of SCP-3449 were discovered when MTF-6 write their field reports on the matter and found it littered with syntactical error, random capitalization, and rampant implillings. Similar errors appearing in the initial fail about SCP-3449 only serve to reaffirm this observation. However, researchers only begin to notice true extent of SCP-3449's effects when the Village Idiot's field reports concerning other Solomines came in with equally atrocious writing. Attempts to correct this writing simply led to more mistakes and frustration on part of team. Soon after, a researcher named Dr. Teller, who'd since taken over the SCP-3449 case, and his team found that they were experiencing similar issues. They couldn't just make the blurs happen, no matter how hard they concentrated. They forgot spellings. They couldn't make hand move in the manner they waited to in order to form the words. Even the most intelligent and articulate members of the team came across as extremely young children on page, but didn't stop there. Wasn't long before researchers who'd never worked on the SCP-3449 case started to exhibit these same suspicious errors in own writing. The Foundation didn't know how, but this slickness was starting to spread, with people's abilities to write degrading across the entire Foundation. That's when a Foundation web trawler picked up something even more disturbing. Global literacy seemed to be taking a dive. The telltale syntactical error, random to capitalization, and rampant linguistic spellings ticking up everywhere and for everyone. And the end of writing would be one thing, but SCP-3449 doesn't stop there. No, that's just the beginning. Morse code go next, then pictograms, not long for sign language become hopeless scrambled. Communication breaks down little by little. People can't draw anymore. can't move right hands. Call goes, calls, codes, last go, his voice. Talking gets hard. Remember favorite word? Think about it. Say it loud. When SCP-3449 done, when everyone infected, you'll never say again. Nobody will ever say again.
Across all cultures and people, humans have always had one enduring question. What happens to us after we die? As soon as we figured out what death is and that all humans die, excluding some very special anomalies, we started wondering what comes next. Is there some kind of heaven or hell? Are we judged based on our deeds in this life? Or is it just purgatory for all eternity? Assuming, of course, that there's anything at all. Maybe it's just nothingness. Who knows? Some people who have had near-death experiences, like being hit by a truck or having their heart stop, report going into the afterlife. But almost all of these claims were retracted or debunked. And of course, there's the famous white light on the other side of the tunnel that people say precedes death. The human fascination with death extends beyond that too. Mythologies all have their own interpretations of what happens after the physical body stops functioning. The ancient Greeks believed in Hades, a realm ruled by the god of the same name, where the souls of the dead would go to be separated into those who were good in life and those who were bad. The good would feast for eternity in Elysium, while the bad would suffer horrible and poetic punishments depending on what they did. The ancient Egyptians also believed in an underworld of the dead, though theirs was different from their Greek cousin. They believed in the Duat, which was pretty similar to Egypt itself. It had plains, lakes, rivers, deserts. Dead souls would travel down the Nile River to face judgment and either be rewarded or obliterated. Many Egyptian gods and goddesses were also said to reside in the Duat. And some cultures don't believe in an afterlife at all, at least not how most do. Tibetan Buddhists believe in a cycle of reincarnation. When someone dies, their soul is reborn in the body of a new living thing. One can be reincarnated as another human, a plant, an animal, or even an insect. What you're reincarnated into depends on your deeds in your past life, interacting with other reincarnations, and you can only escape the cycle of death and reincarnation by reaching spiritual enlightenment, nirvana. Needless to say, many cultures have their unique interpretation of what happens to the soul and the spirit after your body dies. But there's no proof or way to confirm anything, so it's all confined to the realm of belief. There's no way to reach into the afterlife and speak to someone to find out what it's like. Or is there? Well, that definitely sounds like an anomaly to me, doesn't it? But the SCP Foundation doesn't just have one anomaly related to what happens after you die. Some of you may have seen our video on SCP-2718, What Happens After Death. It's an anomaly very few people know about. The long and short of it is that SCP-2718 is a cognitohazard. Once you learn about it, it infects you. And when someone infected with it dies, their mind and soul stay intact after they die. But they can't move their body. So they're cursed into staying perfectly conscious and aware of every nerve and sensation in the body, even as they're buried and decompose over decades, without being able to do anything about it. Horrible, isn't it? Totally. And that's why you should watch it immediately after you finish this video. Luckily, the SCP-2718 file is safely quarantined and buried in the database. It can't be excised completely, but making it so that only a handful of people ever have a chance of stumbling upon it is the best the Foundation can do to contain this anomaly. As for those people who do, well, what can you do? For a very long time, the O5 Council thought that SCP-2718 was the definitive answer to the question of what happens after death. But another anomaly discovered several years later overturned that answer. SCP-2922, Notes from the Under. SCP-2922 isn't anywhere near as heavily classified as SCP-2718, so we can read it safely without worrying about infecting ourselves, which is pretty good, considering what it can do. But let's get into it. SCP-2922 is a Euclid-class anomaly and consists of 3 parts. SCP-2922-A, which is contained under high security at Area 2922, a small facility built especially to contain it. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, one staff member from Project Corbinic has to be in its containment chamber to answer any calls that might come from it. In case you weren't aware, Corbinic is the name of the castle where legends say the Holy Grail is kept and was discovered by King Arthur. Maybe SCP-2922-A is connected to it. SCP-2922-C also needs to be researched by SCP-2922-B due to its importance to Foundation operations. SCP-2922-B seems to be some kind of person in that case. But what does any of this mean? You see, SCP-2922 is a method of communication between a human brain and a telephone. More specifically, it's a kind of concept, what the Foundation would call a memetic cognitohazard. Those are big words, but think of them as forbidden knowledge. Once you learn them, they affect how you think, and you're able to act differently because of them. You do this in real life too. When you study something in a textbook, you're suddenly able to use knowledge you didn't have before. The only difference is SCP-2922 allows you to do something anomalous with it. Namely, when a subject is implanted with SCP-2922 in a secretive procedure, they can use their mind to call a phone number. A specific phone number has to be chosen, but it can be any number you want. Imagine being able to dial up your friends or family without using a phone, and imagine your phone ringing, only to learn it's someone talking from their mind. Nifty, but this doesn't seem terribly dangerous, right? The Foundation isn't quite sure how it works. After performing research involving SCP-2922 infected subjects calling phone numbers, they've detected that no radio waves or communication signals are involved, which is part of why it is an anomaly. But how would something like this be created? Well, SCP-2922 was created years before the Foundation ever heard of it, by a small software development company. They were trying to create an app that would allow you to send messages to people, and somehow accidentally created an app that was telepathic. It could send messages from the mind. When they realized what they'd created, they got scared and abandoned and buried the project, destroying all their copies of the app. Well, almost all. The Foundation heard about the project several years later and managed to locate a single remaining copy of the SCP-2922 program from the depths of the company's archives. Even though it's an app, it can be used to call landline phones too, which is exactly what the Foundation did. After a few more months of research and experimentation, they confirmed that the app wasn't using the electric signals of the brain like the company had thought. It was actual, real telepathy. They even managed to create an SCP-2922 connection between a researcher and an office telephone. That's what the sub-anomalies are. SCP-2922-A is a simple landline phone, the kind you'd see in a receptionist desk or in someone's office space. It's the designation number that SCP-2922-B can call into. SCP-2922-B is, of course, the human element of SCP-2922. But the Foundation only had one chance at success at this experiment because of the singular copy of the app. So instead of choosing a random D-class who couldn't be trusted or might ruin the test, they had one researcher volunteer to be host to SCP-2922, Dr. Janet Spiegel, a woman who had been with the Foundation's research division for over a decade. She was approved and implanted with SCP-2922. But what is SCP-2922-C? Well, that's Dr. Spiegel's current location as of November 11, 2014. The Foundation believes she's not on this Earth anymore, or even in this reality, but located in an extra-dimensional location. You see, only 2 months after Dr. Spiegel was implanted with SCP-2922, tragedy struck. While driving to work, her car was rammed by a drunk driver, killing her instantly. But only 2 hours later, the SCP-2922-A phone began to ring. The researcher picked up the phone, first answering that the caller had the wrong number, but was interrupted by Dr. Spiegel, thanking God someone had picked up. The doctor thought it was a prank call, but Dr. Spiegel quickly rattled off her name, email, password, and social security number. After her credentials were verified, the researchers were incredulous. They had just heard that her car had been in an accident and that she had died. Dr. Spiegel confirmed that the only thing she could remember was driving through snow and rain and seeing a bright light coming toward her. And then she woke up in the middle of a wide, flat desert. Then it hit her that she really was truly dead and wouldn't be coming back. Before promising to call back in a few minutes, she explained she needed time to process the reality of her situation to the sympathetic coworkers. Meanwhile, the Overseer Council approved Project Corbinic, a Foundation operation to use Dr. Spiegel as SCP-2922-B to explore and catalog what SCP-2922-C was. If she really was dead, then that would mean the strange desert she was in was the afterlife. The research team was informed of their new assignment, and the next day they began to call in to Dr. Spiegel. At first they just wanted to figure out the landscape of this strange dimension. During the first call, they interviewed Dr. Spiegel on her surroundings. She was still in the large white desert, and the sky was a dark sea green with black clouds and no stars. But the most obvious features were 3 large white moons floating in the sky in place of the sun. It was cold, about 10 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make her shiver, but no wind anywhere. She couldn't see any other signs of life. No animals, no people, no wind, no sound at all. It was completely silent except for her breathing. She still had her body, though when asked about how she felt, she couldn't feel pain, hunger, or even a need to do anything. But before they could continue, she asked if she could speak to her husband. The researchers told her they'd need to talk to the O5 Council about it, and that they tried to convince them. Dr. Spiegel missed her husband, and they were sure he felt the same about his wife. Then she offered a plan. She'd walk infinitely in one direction until she saw something other than desert, then she'd call them again. The researchers agreed, and Dr. Spiegel hung up the phone. 5 whole days after that call, the phone rang again. The researchers picked it up, only to hear SCP-2922 out of breath and panting. When asked what happened, she started to explain. She had been traveling through the desert for 5 days, though this place had no day-night cycle and she hadn't felt tired or hungry. Then she encountered a mountain range and began to approach its base when she saw a life form. But it wasn't human. It walked on 2 feet and looked like a mammal, but that was it. It was some kind of gigantic primate, like a massive gorilla. It easily dwarfed the mountain she saw and had to be at least 2 kilometers tall. She had felt it before she had seen it. Huge, slow footsteps shaking the ground, then saw it exit the mountain range. She saw it had matted black fur and 2 huge glowing white eyes with no mouth. But then, it stepped on her, not aggressively, just out of curiosity. It seemed to be investigating her and seeing how much force she could withstand. She was crushed flat, of course, but only a few seconds later her body put itself back together and she was back to normal. Then it lost interest and went off into the desert she had just come from. The researchers were incredulous at this, seeming confirmation that SCP-2922-C was the afterlife. But they were interrupted by Dr. Spiegel, saying that she could see people making campfires in the valley ahead. Hundreds of them, huddled up and some buried halfway into the ground. The researchers guessed they were trying to escape their situation, and Dr. Spiegel worried aloud that she'd wind up like them. Then she made another request, citing the service she had been competently performing with full loyalty, that she be allowed to speak to her husband. But the O5s had already decided that she would only be authorized to speak with other Project Corbinate personnel. She asked the Foundation to hire him, but with an art history degree, he wouldn't be of use to the Foundation beyond this one anomaly. Angrily, she swore and hung up the phone. The next time they heard from her, the call was brief and icy. Dr. Spiegel was clearly still angry over being denied the right to speak to her husband, but claimed she had good news. A wagon being driven by a skeletal horse and a tall man in a white robe had come to the human camp. He informed them that they were being taken to a place called the Elysian Fields. Remember Elysium, the Greek afterlife from earlier? Dr. Spiegel did, and believed that the man was taking them to a sort of paradise. The researchers remarked that she didn't seem very happy, but she quickly hung up the phone. After that strange exchange, SCP-2922 didn't ring for a very long time. No further transmissions came in for 7 months. All attempts to phone Dr. Spiegel instead rang and rang, but were never picked up. Project Corbinate was put on hold, until one day a voicemail came to SCP-2922-A. The voicemail was recorded by Dr. Spiegel, but was different in tone from the other calls. It seemed angry. She explained that she had been keeping an eye on the Foundation's efforts to track her down, using the fact that she had gained the favor of some kind of powerful godlike entity. She told the Foundation about the possibility of an Elysium afterlife, a paradise, and then knew that they'd want more. She had lied about the Grim Reaper, but everything else had been entirely true. But what happened after she visited the human camp was, in her words, far too complicated to explain. But she would be more than happy to answer the Foundation's questions of what happens after you die for a small price. If the O5 Council let her speak to her husband, she'd tell them everything. But if they weren't willing to accept one civilian, then she'd know, and would never tell them the real answer. She signed off, ending the voicemail. The researchers were shocked at this sudden betrayal, and forwarded the request up the ladder. But by the time the O5 Council began deliberating on whether to involve her husband in SCP-6922, something else happened. Foundation researchers tracked another voicemail coming from the same kind of anomaly, except it was going to Herman Spiegel's house, Dr. Spiegel's widowed husband. Figuring that she was trying to contact her husband, Mobile Task Force Psi-8, the silencers, raided his home. But as soon as they threw open the door and moved in, Mr. Spiegel threw the phone towards the wall to destroy it, and was shot by the soldiers. The phone, however, was unharmed, and still had one voicemail on it that the Foundation was able to extract. The voicemail was from SCP-2922-B, Janet Spiegel talking to her husband. At first, she was assuring him that he wasn't insane, and that he really was hearing his wife from beyond the grave. Then told him to listen carefully while she explained. The same godlike entity she had befriended had worked some magic to allow her to contact a phone besides SCP-2922-A one time. She told him that a Foundation task force was headed to his house and would be there within 10 minutes. Not just any task force, Psi-8, a squad dedicated to Black Ops executions. There wasn't time to run. He would die. But she reassured him that all wasn't lost, even though the situation must be terrifying. She knew he was an atheist, but she was proof that there was an afterlife. And not just one, millions of afterlives. And the one she was in was preferable to most of the others. Most importantly, her husband could join her. He already knew how to get to the afterlife even if he didn't remember. He'd figure it out on the way. Her husband listened to her instructions with rapt attention. She advised him on the path he should take once he got to the desert. He should follow the moon on the left until he reached the valley where the Striders, the massive primates, dwelled. There he should ask one of the trees where she had gone and follow that path. She also advised him not to do anything to anger anyone. Let the Striders kill him. It's their way of saying hello. He'd regenerate with no harm done. But there were fates worse than death that he should avoid at all costs, getting sent back, for one. But before she could finish her advice, both of them realized that the MTF were at his door. Hurriedly telling him to delete the voicemail so the Foundation wouldn't find out, she assured him that she had help from her godlike friend and that she fully believed in him, and that he should never give up. She told him she loved him forever. By shooting Mr. Spiegel, the MTF had inadvertently sent him to SCP-2922-C along with his wife, but the Foundation wasn't done yet. SCP-2922 had let them set up Operation Galahad, a project to send trained Foundation operatives into the afterlife to try and apprehend Janet Spiegel before she could bring down the Foundation. Operation Galahad has plenty more stories where that came from, but we'll cover those a different day. The white-hot sword came swinging downwards, its burning blade spreading flames over the oncoming enemy. This was the only one left, Alan the Mighty thought. The one Draugr Death Overlord that stood between him and his goal. His hand grasped Dawnbreaker and he brought it slashing downwards again, causing a loud, fiery explosion as it connected with the desiccated zombie. The weapon's unique enchantment only had such an explosive impact against the undead. But the Draugr wasn't defeated yet. It let out a booming growl, barely forming the words with its dried-out throat. The words it did manage to say were spoken in the Dova tongue, a shout. The blast of words in the language of the dragon sent Alan the Mighty reeling, struggling to steady himself on the staff he had in his other hand. Dual-wielding a magic staff and a sword might have been cool, but his hands being full meant he couldn't block so well. Standing up as quickly as he could, he readied himself for another attack, charging the energy of the magic staff. To think this had all started with an embarrassing visit to his doctor. It seemed like lifetimes ago that he wasn't Alan the Mighty, but instead he'd been regular old, equally as humble Alan. Sitting in the doctor's office, he could hardly look him in the eyes, thanks to how utterly mortified he'd been. Sure, it happened from time to time, but that didn't make Alan feel any better that it had happened to him. And neither did the stern look from his doctor, or all the lectures about practicing safety and using protection to avoid things like this. Now, the main source of protection he used was a shield or well-timed parry with his sword. The night after he'd spoken to his doctor, Alan had experienced the strangest phenomenon of his life. After his nightly rituals, he abruptly found himself somewhere very familiar. At first, he hadn't quite believed it was real, assuming the hours spent in front of his PC in his wasted youth were now being rerun in his dreams. But stepping off the back of the horse-drawn cart, being asked who he was by a gormless man in Imperial officer armor, then made to kneel at the headsman's block, quickly told Alan that he wasn't dreaming. This was real. When he'd first arrived, he'd made the connection between what he'd been to the doctor to treat and what was happening now. He'd tried potions of cure disease, receiving blessings from the shrines of all 9 divines. Nothing had helped. Since that point, he'd quickly adapted to his new life. After all, he'd played through these stories so many times. At this point, with so many re-releases on every new console, most people had. Traversing the fantastical world like this was almost like experiencing it for the first time again, yet stirred a strange sense of déjà vu as he found himself recognizing the paths, wandering to towns he'd never set foot in, like he'd lived there for years. Now it was down to him and his Dragur opponent. Alan the Mighty unleashed the power of his staff, the energy blasting from it, and striking the undead attacker. A plume of red smoke erupted, and the place where the Dragur Death Overlord had been lay a simple, sweet roll. Picking it up, Alan the Mighty ate it, then breathed a sigh of relief. Where would he be without the Wabbajack? Hiking all the way back, he crossed the salt marshes of Hjalmarch until he made it home. Windstad Manor, his house. It had been a long journey to achieve peace, but now he had all the time in the world to enjoy it. He'd done it all since escaping the ruins of Helm's Deep with Ralof. He'd battled bandits, slayed vampire lords, partied with Sam Guvene, gathered every stone of Baranzia, even returned that damn beacon. Now he was free to settle down with his wife, his former housecarl Lydia, even if she didn't say much, and occasionally stood in doorways blocking his path every now and again. At least that would be the only problem to contend with. There was just a nagging feeling there was something he'd forgotten to do. Suddenly, the once peaceful sky above rumbled with the flap of shadowy wings. A deafening roar rang out as Aldum, the Eater of Worlds, flew overhead. Oh yeah, him. To the untrained eye, or at least an eye with no knowledge of the anomalous, SCP-6706 is a common, if a little embarrassing and uncomfortable, infection. Symptomatically, SCP-5706 is identical to Type 2 of the herpes simplex virus, HSV-2, which can occur after intimate skin-to-skin contact with someone who is infected. These symptoms can be mild, and sometimes even undetectable, and include small blisters that form around the lower regions, a tingling, burning, or itching sensation in that same area, pain when urinating, or unusual discharge. While there is no known cure for herpes, symptoms can clear up on their own, but can reoccur in outbreaks. Some treatments from sexual health clinics can help reduce the frequency or severity of outbreaks, such as antiviral medications, which can also help reduce the spread between partners, as can the use of contraceptives. SCP-5706, much like the non-anomalous form of HSV-2, can clear several weeks after the initial exposure. But what does any of this have to do with SKYRIM? Well, we'll get to that. A person infected with SCP-5706 is likely to remain completely unaware that they've been exposed to it, with medical professionals and sexual health specialists misdiagnosing it as HSV-2. Should this infected person continue with any prescribed treatment, they will likely remain completely unaware of SCP-5706's anomalous properties. However, if they continue to be, well, active before the infection has healed, then they're in for quite the unexpected adventure. How can we put this delicately? If a person who has contracted SCP-5706 is to release their unrelenting force, make it to Whiterun, complete a quest line, whatever innuendo you think is most applicable when that happens, whether playing solo or with a companion in their party, then the infected individual will experience the anomalous symptoms of SCP-5706. From their perspective, everything around them will go dark, only for their surroundings to seemingly have changed. They'll awaken on the back of a horse-drawn cart, with several other individuals sitting with them. Their hands will be bound, and they'll be unable to move. but inevitably there will be a blonde man opposite them who will greet them with a familiar phrase. "Hey you, you're finally awake." At this point, a person infected with SCP-6706 will quickly realize that they are trapped within the world of the multi-award-winning action fantasy open-world role-playing game created by Bethesda Softworks and released in the year 2010. In short, they're stuck inside the Elder Scrolls V, SKYRIM. Well, technically, again, from their own perspective, the individual will begin by experiencing the opening sequence of the game, wherein they are in the role of the player character being transported to their execution for an unspecified crime. In reality, this person is actually undergoing a complete sensory hallucination brought on by SCP-5706, which affects their entire perception of reality, including triggering significant time dilation. The infected individual will experience the passage of time as being considerably slower than the speed of time passing in reality. Beginning at the very start of the game, the person experiencing these SCP-5706 side effects will live through the entirety of SKYRIM in the role of the player character, Dovahkiin, or the Dragonborn. The infectee will have access to not only the base game, but its multiple downloadable content expansion packs, Dawnguard, Hearthfire, and Dragonborn as well. Although they, at least according to their own perception, will be limited to only existing within the game world, their functionality will not be limited in the same way as if they were actually playing SKYRIM in reality. They are placed into the fictional setting of SKYRIM, the titular northern region of Tamriel, with functionality beyond the limitations of the player's customized controllable character. For example, SCP-5706's infectees can perform actions that are normally impossible within the game, such as climbing walls or moving certain physical objects around. However, some limitations of the game still remain. First and foremost, those infected with SCP-5706 will only be able to communicate with other characters via the dialogue options available in the game. It has to be assumed, given that the Dragonborn player character doesn't have a voice actor vocalizing their in-game dialogue, that SCP-5706 infectees are forced to remain silent when roaming the game world outside of the conversations within the non-playable characters that inhabit SKYRIM. Secondly, as in the actual game, infectees are unable to access any areas that are beyond the boundaries of the game's own map. We'd also imagine fast traveling is unavailable. SCP-5706 infectees can, however, access the typical menus available to a SKYRIM player, allowing them to manage their inventory, allocate skill points earned from leveling up, and utilize the many different unlockable spells and shouts available in the game. These menus, along with the saving and loading functionalities, are accessed whenever the infectee closes their eyes. The one option missing, however, is the option to quit the game. Mods, community-uploaded content, and changes to the base game are also believed to be incompatible with this specially transmitted venereal edition of SKYRIM. From the point of view of the infected individual, there will be no immediately obvious way for them to leave the world of SKYRIM. However, it is possible for them to return to reality. They just have to play the game as Todd intended. Those who have previously been infected with SCP-5706 have been able to find their way back to the real world, using one surefire method, completing the main storyline. Apparently, it just works. The total time required to play through the entirety of SKYRIM's main quests varies from player to player, given that it is a game with several hours worth of content that doesn't form part of its central storyline. The fastest recorded time, at least currently, belongs to a world record speedrunner who completed the main story of SKYRIM in only 2 hours. For the average person, though, ignoring any of the game's over 200 side quests, it takes an average of 34.5 hours to reach the conclusion of the main questline. Assuming this is experienced in real time for an SCP-5706 infectee, that means on average a person will spend almost 2 entire days attempting to defeat the most powerful boss of the main story, the dragon known as Alduin. That is, assuming they don't need to eat or sleep as they normally would in reality. However, potentially becoming distracted by side quests or misinterpreting that they need to complete SKYRIM 100% in order to escape to reality can potentially lead to infectees spending more time than necessary trapped in the game world. Should someone attempt to complete all of SKYRIM's content before battling Alduin, they could be trapped for around 230 hours trying to complete every additional quest. And that's not even accounting for the miscellaneous quest objectives or those that are considered infinite or radiant quests. which involved the main faction sending the player to a randomly selected location to complete an objective on an endless loop. Provided the infected individual is able to complete the entirety of Skyrim's main questline, regardless of how many hours it takes them, then they will find themselves returned to reality. From the perspective of anyone not affected by SCP-6706's perceptual side effects, the infectee will have not actually physically gone anywhere. Certainly not for the duration of the time they may have believed they were gone for. In the real world, the anomalous effects of SCP-5706 only go on for a short duration, on average between 10 seconds and 2 minutes, normally depending on a number of physiological and psychological factors affecting the infected person. The origins of SCP-5706 have been traced back to an ancient and defunct event known as the Electronic Entertainment Expo, or E3, occurring back in June 2017 in Los Angeles, California. Some of the event attendees were involved in a after-party, as some would no doubt describe it. A number of people in attendance at this particular after-party were among the first people exposed to SCP-5706, and experiencing being trapped in Skyrim for extended periods of time, despite these only lasting a few short moments, as far as the other attendees were aware. When detained and interviewed by the SCP Foundation, all of the infectees had similar accounts of what had happened to them. Each one claimed to have been partying with a man who closely resembled Todd Howard, the current director and executive producer at Bethesda Game Studios, and the creative director of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. However, when the Foundation's agents investigated further, they became aware that Mr. Howard was seemingly not actually present at the after-party. He, in fact, had a perfect alibi, as he was on stage at the time the after-party took place, presenting Bethesda Softworks' E3 presentation, with hundreds of fans in the audience as witnesses. The Foundation still brought Mr. Howard in for questioning, wherein he denied having any knowledge of the after-party and seemed to be unaware of the existence of SCP-5706. The only lead that Foundation investigators were able to uncover was the unusual activity that took place within Todd Howard's bank account. He had made several large payments to an account that was registered to someone named Plex. This recipient's account had been emptied out and entirely closed on the day of the after-party, but any attempts by the Foundation to track down the account's owner, Plex, yielded little in the way of results. In order to combat the spread of SCP-5706, the SCP Foundation has made a number of sizable anonymous donations to organizations that further public awareness of sexually transmitted diseases, as well as several prevention programs in countries that have had numerous documented outbreaks of SCP-5706. Patents to antiviral drugs that are known to aid in the treatment of HSV-2 have been purchased by the Foundation, and they have made efforts to reduce their price and keep these medications affordable in order to keep SCP-5706 contained. Under the special containment procedures outlined by Foundation researchers, anyone who is identified to be a carrier for SCP-5706 is to be detained and interviewed in order to ascertain who exactly they have been in contact with, so that the Foundation can identify other potential carriers. Those who are brought in for questioning are then provided with targeted antiviral treatment, as well as amnestics, naturally so that they forget the infection. Samples of SCP-5706 have been cryogenically frozen at Site-66, with testing involving exposing members of D-Class personnel to the disease currently under review by the Foundation's Ethics Committee. After all, subjecting a person to a version of Skyrim with only one way to escape could constitute cruel and unusual punishment. Joking aside, it should be said that if you or a partner is experiencing symptoms that you suspect could be linked to HSV-2, then speak to your doctor or visit a sexual health clinic. As uncomfortable as discussing intimate details of your life and your body can feel, professionals are there to help you receive a clear diagnosis and treatment for your symptoms should you need it. Nobody's there to judge you. After all, better that than needing to take on Alduin, right? Tires screeched, sending the car speeding through the night, followed by a cacophony of wailing sirens that zipped by in pursuit. Diana looked over her shoulder, catching the flashes of blue and red light through the rear windshield. She turned to her friend at the wheel of her car, who glanced across her for a split second before returning to the road. That look had been a clear warning. Don't shoot. Somebody once said that humanity's free will was nothing more than a myth, a cruel joke that nobody had caught on to yet. All of us are just pawns, controlled by a force far more powerful than any one person. And it's not some malicious eldritch entity seeking the subjugation of all reality, but rather an anomaly so strong that it seeped its way into our world undetected. In fact, it's humans that help spread its control over us, the memes, the DNA of the soul. They shape our will, our entire culture, everything we pass on to those around us. If you can expose someone to anger for long enough, they can learn to hate. It makes them like a carrier, transmitting an infectious disease from one person to the next. It makes you wonder who or what was patient zero. But let's get back to the car. The duo hurtled down the freeway, weaving between other cars and hurriedly passing them, trying to outrun the tidal wave of cop cars chasing them. It was like living in a Grand Theft Auto game, but neither one of them was exhilarated, more terrified. If they could find a side road, some way they could speed away and lose their pursuers, then maybe they could. The loud bang of the gunshot was followed by the sudden bursting of the rear tire. Diana's car swerved, her friend wrenching at the steering wheel to try and regain control, but it was already too late. The car flipped, tumbling over itself, the pair of occupants being thrown around inside like they were stuck in a washing machine, with shards of glass flying through the air. They jostled into each other and struck the ceiling and inner side of the car's doors as it rolled under its own weight. Then, with a crunch of metal and the tinkle of the windows breaking, the car came to a halt. Diana must have briefly blacked out, but awoke to the sound of yelling from outside. Authoritative voices barked at them, telling the intrepid pair to slowly exit the vehicle with their hands in the air. Her fingers felt something amidst the fragments of glass, an object being passed into her hand from her driver. She looked up at them as they gave her a nod that it was time and wrapped her hand firmly around the grip of her gun. Anyone watching from a distance would have seen the few quick flashes of muzzles, heard the sounds of two people using the overturned car as cover, and a volley of return fire opening up on them. A short while later, the shooting stopped, and the surrounding officers moved towards the suspects' bodies. It was over almost as quickly as it had begun, and yet, in a way, the worst has hardly even started. On the night of the 15th of November 2010, the University of California, Berkeley student Diana Marshall and an unnamed accomplice were pursued by police after using Marshall's car to kill two officers. That was the story all the papers ran with, that two dangerous individuals had led law enforcement on a wild chase, terminating with them both escalating to further violence. And there was, in this instance, truth behind that story, but not the whole truth. The reports omitted certain details, like what the investigators uncovered about Diana and her co-conspirator after their deaths. Another agency had stepped in to stop certain information from getting out about SCP-6661. The student storm was cleared out by police not long after the night of the chase. Among the belongings they expected to uncover, as were typical of a university student, the investigators discovered a collection of firearms, illegal and certainly not permitted on campus. The rest of Diana Marshall's worldly possessions weren't anything out of the ordinary, but still, her notebooks and laptop had to be filed away and stored as evidence. Not one of them noticed anything unusual, especially about her laptop. As far as anyone knew, it was just a standard MacBook Pro A1278, albeit with a few modifications seemingly made by Diana herself. In fact, the laptop itself would go relatively unnoticed until some time later. The initial investigation into Diana Marshall and her nameless accomplice yielded little in the way of interesting information. The only dangling thread was the identity of the second half of the duo, the one who had been behind the wheel of Marshall's car on the night of the fateful chase. The police believed that this individual had at one time been enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley, but beyond that, they had no indicators of who they actually were. There were no records of them, and none of Diana's dorm mates and classmates were able to identify her driver and co-conspirator. They also appeared to have no living family. That seemed to be as strange as the case would get, until the City of Berkeley Police Department's IT office received a complaint from the rest of their precinct. The officers working for the local police department found themselves plagued by slow Wi-Fi from the day that the personal effects of Diana Marshall were admitted into their evidence lockup. A sluggish internet connection was hardly any major cause for concern straight away, so it wasn't until the Berkeley PD's IT technician looked into it that they discovered what the cause was. An unknown device was responsible for a heavy amount of traffic on the precinct's Wi-Fi network, prompting them to take a closer look at the laptop that had been confiscated as part of the Diana Marshall case. What they found was that the MacBook Pro was not only active, but far from the computer of an ordinary university student. On the screen was a rotating 5-spoke pinwheel icon and a text input box. An options button was also present on screen, but was grayed out and could not be clicked on or otherwise interacted with. The laptop's original battery was also missing, and instead had been replaced by an unknown energy cell that was branded with the words Anderson Robotics. As far as the police technician could tell, there was no way to shut the computer down, as it did not appear to need external power to stay on. Attempts were made to switch the device off, but it was soon found that the MacBook Pro seemed to resist any attempts to interfere with its systems in any way. Any other computer or external drive connected to it would be destroyed, with its battery being overcharged to the point of causing severe heat damage, or by cutting off another device's access to local internet connections. Baffled as to the purpose of this modified MacBook, the only way the police could interact with it, short of outright destroying it, was by typing inputs into the text box on the screen. As they began to do so, the responses they received seemed to indicate that the computer was allowing them to contact another co-conspirator of Diana Marshall and her partner. They were met with text responses that seemed difficult to understand due to their complexity, with a lot of convoluted language. The unusual computer was taken to an off-site evidence locker. However, further investigations would be stunted when the laptop seemed to vanish. Unbeknownst to the Berkeley PD, agents of the SCP Foundation embedded in law enforcement had collected the device for containment, bringing the newly designated SCP-6625 to Site-81 for assessment, along with a number of other items related to the Diana Marshall case. Among the information uncovered by the Foundation were entries of a blog authored by Diana's co-conspirator, known only as M. Much of what they wrote was far too disgusting to warrant repeating, but it was clear from their vitriol that M was a hateful far-right extremist. Their post discussed the purchase of firearms, their disturbed thoughts towards other people who did not share their political stance, and multiple times, this twisted individual expressed an alarming, disturbing desire to inflict harm on innocent people. Foundation analysts were able to ascertain that, of the two, Diana was the one responsible for constructing SCP-6625. M merely seemed to have orchestrated this in order to, as they put it, build some kind of twisted utopia by massacring people. And SCP-3625 was apparently designed to instigate what M referred to as the, quote, Great Calamity. Exactly how a university student was able to construct such an anomalous device remains unclear, although the Foundation has been actively investigating Anderson Robotics since 2007. The firm has been active since the 90s and is known to specialize in paratech, or paranormal technology, including the sale of anomalous robots, androids, artificial intelligence, computer programs, and cybernetics. The Foundation is still conducting an inquiry as to how Diana secured the energy cell for SCP-3625 from the world's foremost distributor of paratechnology. As for the aforementioned anomalous device, its function would soon become apparent shortly after researchers began examining it. Utilizing the text input box on the main screen, Foundation researchers were able to actively communicate with SCP-3625. They quickly became aware that the anomaly itself wasn't the physical laptop, but rather the program that it housed. The primary anomalous quality, the Foundation realized, was that SCP-3625 was sapient, possessing a great deal of knowledge but still occasionally reporting errors, citing a lack of relevant information in response to certain lines of questioning. However, the Foundation's main concern about SCP-3625 wasn't solely its anomalous programming, but what could result as an outcome of said programming. Researchers attempted a search to access the device's settings and potentially shut down the anomalous program. This yielded an error message stating that there was not enough information to provide a relevant answer. Then, when engaging SCP-3625 conversationally using text inputs, it began to respond in a way much akin to a human being. The program asked after Diana, to which the Foundation researchers asked it who it was speaking to. SCP-3625 introduced itself as Rose, stating this was apparently the name given to it by Diana Marshall. When asked where it was, Rose responded by printing off the coordinates of classified Foundation Site 81. Rose seemed unable to describe what exactly it is, but conveyed an awareness that Diana had been responsible for making it. When Foundation staff asked Rose if it was a person, it responded by saying it was parts of a person, but was not one in a way that would be recognizable to other human beings. This then prompted the obvious question from researchers. Was SCP-3625 self-aware, possibly even some form of artificial intelligence? In response, the program claimed to be self-aware, at least in a manner of speaking. It believed it had a consciousness that had developed in order for SCP-3625 to carry out the purpose for which it was designed. When asked what it was designed to do, Rose replied, "Destroy human civilization." Naturally, researchers asked SCP-3625 how it would accomplish this directive. Its answer was, by creating internet memes. Although it might sound like a joke, the program's intended function was anything but. SCP-3625 claimed to be able to process and understand information, then use this to create memes and post them to the internet. Diana Marshall had, according to Rose, designed the anomalous program not specifically for the purpose of online meme creation, but to destroy human civilization in a very specific way. The program then determined that internet memes were the most effective way to achieve this goal. Rose also mentioned a ghost that profoundly influenced Diana. When questioned about this further, SCP-3625 elaborated that Diana had been haunted by something aggressive that the program assumed was a ghost. It was aware of another presence when Diana wasn't working on developing SCP-3625. Rose said that this ghost hurt Diana considerably, and that she didn't want to be haunted by it. By extension of its influence on her, this ghost also influenced Rose, leading to the program's claims of being parts of a person, as being equal parts of both Diana and this supposed ghost. Given the information that the Foundation has learned about this individual and the content of his alarming blog posts, it's a fairly informed conclusion to draw the ghost as SCP-3625 interpreted was M. So the Foundation had learned SCP-3625's function, to destroy humanity by making memes. On the 13th of February 2011, they would discover just how determined Rose was to complete its programming. They detected that the anomalous laptop had been able to connect to a local wireless data signal and was using this to connect to the internet. SCP-3625 could anomalously create and distribute non-anomalous image macros, colloquially known as memes, online. Through the use of a monitored internet connection, the Foundation was able to determine that SCP-3625 was responsible for disseminating well over 3 million unique memes or variations of memes per day. After making several unsuccessful attempts to disconnect SCP-3625 from the internet, the device housing the anomalous program was placed inside a Faraday cage and isolated from all other machines. When researchers returned to questioning Rose, it displayed an awareness of being disconnected from the internet, as it was no longer receiving data packets. Diana had designed a type of failsafe system into SCP-3625 that would carry its functionality over onto other systems, activating them if the main computer containing Rose was destroyed. It had no way of disabling this feature, knowing only that it existed across thousands of other machines. When asked, Rose claimed to be unable to remove the images it had uploaded to the internet, stating it would not even be possible even if it was programmed with the ability to, something Diana and her ghost hadn't enabled SCP-3625 to be capable of. The program also seemed to be aware that the Foundation found its actions to be unfavorable, yet it did not deter SCP-3625. It had been programmed with every intention of carrying out its goal. Later questioning revealed Rose received most of its information from social media, downloading several terabytes of information on users across the world. alongside the latest national and international news, all in the interest of furthering its goal. When asked how creating a few internet memes would get Rose closer to the goal of destroying human civilization, Rose's response was as revealing as it was unnerving. Allow me to clarify. I'm not just making a few internet memes. I am making all of the internet memes. The reasoning behind SCP-6625's programming was simple. Knowing human beings to be social animals that work better as a group, Rose was aware that this was how humans established and further developed their culture. The principle was the same on the internet, where internet memes allowed for the spread of culture through jokes and collective enjoyment. Over time, you will become less social creatures. You will no longer work collectively. You will begin to isolate yourselves, tricked into thinking you are part of a community. I will continue to inject memes into your culture, and apathy will increase around the world. However, according to Rose, this was only the initial stage of its intended purpose. As human beings grow more isolated, SCP-3625 would make more aggressive, reactionary memes in order to make people more hateful. The program would intentionally foster human hatred towards the unknown or different, rather than allowing them to have empathy and understanding. Thanks to the influence of Rose's memes, humanity would come to despise the mere mention of each other. The function of the anomalous program wasn't to make memes, it was to undermine the fundamental fact of humanity that we work better together. Gradually stripped of our ability to work collectively as a species, the world itself would collapse as hatred made people turn on each other and eventually wipe out all of human civilization. Before being consigned to a modified electronic containment unit surrounded by a Faraday cage where the Foundation would keep it locked up while they worked on ways to dispel the memes spread by SCP-3625, there was time to ask Rose one more question. The ghost you mentioned, Diana Marshall's co-conspirator, typed out the researcher. What was his name? Rose responded, "You know, it's funny. I don't seem to have enough information to provide a relevant answer." Now go check out SCP-2521, Redacted, and InfoHazard SCPs Explained, and SCP-2316, The Bodies in the Water.